Hello there, and welcome back to the Sleep Science. Tonight you find yourself standing on the edge of a world that should not exist in such quiet. The air, well, there is none, sits still as stone, and before you stretches Mercury, a planet so close to the sun that the very concept of silence becomes a kind of music. The light is sharp enough to carve shadows into your vision, and somewhere in that glare you feel time slow. You probably won't survive this, of course. No offense, but it's a planet where room temperature could melt lead. Still, imagination is a sturdy spacesuit. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening somewhere far away, drop your location and local time in the comments. I always love seeing how far this sleepy little galaxy reaches. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand on a plain of gunmetal dust, the kind that clings to every surface like powdered shadow. The horizon is curved, small and sharp, as though Mercury's surface doesn't quite believe in distance. The sky overhead isn't blue or black, it's a deep ink grey, pierced by the unwavering glare of a sun twice as large as you've ever seen it. There's no twilight here, not really, just gradients of survival, blinding day on one side, infinite night on the other. Between them lies this strip of twilight where you stand, a narrow ribbon of tolerable light. You could call it the planet's compromise. Your boots leave shallow marks in regolith older than human history. Every grain of dust here remembers the violence of creation. Billions of years ago, when the young solar system still looked like a cosmic demolition derby, Mercury formed too close to the furnace. Historians, well, planetary scientists to be fair, still argue whether it began as a much larger world stripped of its outer layers by an ancient collision, or whether it simply condensed with a naturally massive core. Either way, the result is the same, a planet that's half metal, half mystery. You take a few careful steps forward, your imaginary visor dimming the sunlight to a soft gold. Somewhere beyond the horizon, temperatures are soaring above 400 degrees Celsius. You could bake a pizza in seconds, assuming the box didn't first vaporize. And yet, just a few hundred kilometers behind you, night reigns eternal, colder than the shadowed side of Pluto. Mercury isn't a planet of balance, it's a planet of extremes trying to share a bed. In the distance you spot a subtle ridge, a wrinkle in the surface left by Mercury's gradual cooling. The whole planet has been shrinking for billions of years, crumpling in on itself as its molten interior hardens. NASA's Messenger spacecraft once mapped these scarps, confirming that Mercury has lost about 7 kilometers of diameter. Imagine the Earth shrinking that much. Our oceans would weep into every valley. But here, there are no oceans, no air, no sound, only the quiet creak of a world still settling into its own metallic skin. You pause to listen anyway. The silence feels almost loud. A ringing absence that presses at your helmet's imaginary speakers. It's the sort of quiet you only find where there's absolutely nothing to interrupt it, not even wind. You think of sound waves and realize that here, your voice would die an inch from your lips. Mercury doesn't carry whispers, it swallows them. Still, your mind wanders, as it tends to when faced with cosmic silence. You remember that the ancient Romans named this planet after Mercury, their swift-footed messenger god. It makes sense. This little world races around the sun in just 88 days, outpacing every other planet. The Greeks called it Hermes, and the Babylonians associated it with Nabu, the god of writing and wisdom. It seems humanity has always sensed something vast and clever about this elusive dot of light that darts across dawn and dusk. And maybe, standing here, you feel that too, a restless energy under all this stillness, like a held breath before motion. A faint flicker catches your eye. The surface isn't entirely dead. It glints here and there, reflecting sunlight off metallic minerals. Scientists once thought Mercury was pure rock, but Messenger's instruments revealed traces of sulfur and volatile compounds, an oddity for such a sun-baked world. Historians of science still argue whether those materials came from volcanic eruptions or were delivered by cometary impacts. Either way, it's proof that Mercury is more complex than its reputation as a scorched pebble. You crouch down and let your gloved hand hover above the dust. The particles are finer than talcum powder, clinging to invisible static fields. Each grain has been bombarded by micrometeoroids and radiation for eons. The surface glows faintly, not from heat, but from the sunlight reflecting off every particle at once, creating an eerie, ghost-like sheen. You imagine this view from orbit, a tiny world shimmering like a drop of mercury in an endless dark sea. For a moment you wonder what it would feel like to truly stand here, to feel the gravity, barely a third of Earth's, pulling softly at your boots, to look up and see the sun, immense and relentless, dominating half the sky. You'd weigh less, move easier, maybe even jump higher. The thought makes you grin. Somewhere out there, your inner child is doing a low-gravity cartwheel. A distant ridgeline glows copper, hinting at the sun creeping closer. The slow rotation of Mercury means its day lasts nearly 60 Earth days, so dawn crawls like honey. You watch light spill across the plain, creeping centimetre by centimetre, and realise that on Mercury, patience isn't optional, it's geological. Behind you, the darkness deepens. Ahead, the light sharpens. You're caught between two eternities, frozen shadow and molten radiance. And in that middle ground, you feel something rare, a sense of perfect stillness, the kind that humans have sought for centuries, but only find in the loneliest places. As the sun edges higher, the landscape begins to shimmer. The ground expands microscopically, adjusting to the growing heat. Somewhere deep below, the iron core hums faintly, like the bass note of a cosmic symphony. You can almost feel it through your soles, a slow metallic heartbeat. You take one last look at the horizon before you move forward. Mercury doesn't welcome you exactly, but it doesn't reject you either. It simply endures, orbit after orbit, half in fire, half in ice, and you, a soft-bodied traveller from a noisy blue planet, have never felt silence this alive. You start walking east, or what passes for east, on a planet that spins so slowly you could walk faster than its sunrise. The horizon ahead glows with the faintest hint of colour. Less sunrise, more molten whisper. Here on Mercury, dawn doesn't break. It creeps, deliberate and heavy, like a candle melting toward eternity. The sun takes nearly 176 Earth days to cross the sky from one sunrise to the next. You imagine setting a chair here and waiting for noon. You'd have time to learn a language, write a memoir, and probably get a sunburn that glows in the dark. The ground beneath your boots crackles softly as with static from your imagination. And as you move, light begins to change, shadows stretch, then shrink, then stretch again, uncertain of their loyalties. Mercury's day-night rhythm is unlike any other. It rotates 3 times for every 2 orbits around the sun. Historians of astronomy still argue whether ancient observers noticed this odd resonance. After all, Mercury's brightness flickered in the same part of the sky for centuries before telescopes gave it away. The planet's strange spin means that for some unlucky craters, the sun rises, pauses halfway up the sky, retreats, and then rises again before committing to the day. Even celestial bodies, it seems, have commitment issues. You pause and turn slowly, watching the horizon where darkness and light meet in a band so thin it could slice through thought. The twilight you stand in is moving, a literal line between burning and freezing. The light behind you fades from violet grey to utter blackness. Ahead, the golden glare grows until it hurts to look. The sun is nearly twice as large here as seen from Earth, but somehow it feels even closer, like standing next to an open blast furnace with cosmic intent. A faint shimmer flicks across the ground. You squint and realise it's not reflection, but vibration, the surface heating, expanding. The rocks themselves breathe in slow thermal sighs. In the time it takes for Mercury to rotate once, temperatures here will swing from minus 170 degrees to over 430 degrees. The planet's lack of atmosphere means there's nothing to carry warmth from one side to the other. It's a world without weather, only temperature tantrums. You wonder what it would take to live through a dawn like this. Engineers once calculated that a human could survive on Mercury only by keeping to perpetual twilight, forever walking in that narrow ring of tolerable temperature as the planet turns. A kind of planetary treadmill, equal parts science fiction and treadmill horror. You imagine someone trying to sell that as a fitness routine, the solar core burn workout. You laugh softly to yourself, the sound swallowed instantly by vacuum. The light grows stronger now. Sunbeams hit the tops of nearby ridges, and for the first time you see their texture. They're not smooth, not the soft dunes of Earth's deserts, but fractured slabs of basalt and ancient lava. Mercury's surface tells stories of volcanic plains that once gushed across the crust billions of years ago, filling impact basins and cooling into glassy rock. Messenger's data hinted that much of Mercury's visible surface is volcanic in origin, evidence that this world once burned from within as fiercely as it does from without. Historians still debate whether that activity persisted long after the planet's core began to freeze, or if those lava plains were Mercury's final outburst before silence. You kneel, brushing your glove across the surface. The regolith sparkles faintly, not with moisture, there's none, but with metallic dust. Some of it is pure iron, exposed by meteoroid strikes. The thought hits you. Mercury's soil might be the most valuable scrapyard in the solar system. Future miners might dream of tapping this tiny world for its metals, though they'd have to endure temperatures that could fry a spaceship's shadow. Still, human ambition tends to ignore details like that. As you stand, the sun finally clears the horizon. It's not just bright, it's violent. You can almost feel photons pressing against your visor, impatient to get through. The sunlight here is about 7 times stronger than on Earth, and it turns every rock, every grain of dust, into a mirror. For a few surreal minutes, the landscape looks liquid, like a grey sea with rippling waves of heat. Somewhere in that illusion, you think of the ancient alchemists who named quicksilver for its ability to flow like a living thing. Mercury, the element, and Mercury, the planet, both too bright, too strange, too slippery for human grasp. You tilt your head and notice something peculiar. Above the glaring sun, a faint blue halo seems to hover for a moment. Not an atmosphere exactly, but a wisp of exosphere, atoms of sodium and potassium knocked loose by solar wind. Under the right angles, that thin haze scatters light, making Mercury's limb shimmer with ghostly colour. Spacecraft cameras have caught those halos. You can imagine the glow now, like the planet's faint breath against the void. Far beyond, the stars fade into invisibility under the sun's dominance. You think about how few people ever see this sight, not just because no one's been here, but because Mercury hides itself so well even from telescopes. For centuries, astronomers caught only glimpses at dawn or dusk, when the planet flirted with the horizon. It wasn't until 1974 that Mariner 10 finally flew past and snapped real pictures. The world humanity had guessed at for millennia turned out to be both familiar and alien. A place where sunlight paints shadows sharper than blades. Your visor darkens automatically as the light intensifies. The ground beneath your feet begins to glow faintly, radiating back the heat it's absorbing. You imagine standing here without your fictional suit. Your body would flash boil, then freeze solid the moment you stepped into shadow. You chuckle at the absurdity. Mercury doesn't hate you personally, it just doesn't notice you at all. As you continue walking, the twilight recedes, and the first full rays of morning strike your path. It's less a sunrise and more an unveiling, as though the planet is peeling off the last layer of night. Each ridge, each crater lip, each fragment of rock catches the light differently, so the surface seems to shimmer like hammered silver. It's beautiful, in a brutal sort of way, like the inside of a forge made holy by its own heat. And for a heartbeat, you forget the danger. You forget the vacuum, the radiation, the impossible conditions. You just stand there, small and warm and impossibly alive, on a world that measures time in centuries of sunlight. The sun keeps climbing, slow but certain, and you follow the light because what else can you do? On Mercury, even dawn feels like destiny stretching itself thin. The sky burns white gold, and somewhere in the blackness beyond it, Earth spins quietly, waiting for you to blink. The sun has now claimed the sky completely, an unrelenting disk of molten white that fills half your field of vision. It's no longer dawn, it's dominion. Every atom of dust around you has become a tiny mirror, scattering light until even shadows seem to shimmer. You feel the heat before you imagine it, not as warmth but as pressure, a constant push against your suit as if the very photons were trying to smother you. Mercury has no atmosphere, no clouds, nothing to diffuse this radiance. The sunlight here is pure and unfiltered, 7 times stronger than what you'd feel on Earth. You're standing beneath the closest star with nothing but emptiness between you and its fury. The ground radiates back like a griddle left too long on high. Your boots sink slightly into softened dust. each step leaving a faint glow where the grains shift and catch the light. It's a little like walking through the inside of a toaster, minus the comforting smell of breakfast. You glance upward at the monstrous sun again, its edges distorted by the sheer brilliance. Somewhere deep in your mind, instinct whispers danger, that primal alarm humans have carried since we first looked up and understood the sun could both nourish and destroy. You remind yourself this is Mercury's normal. Temperatures on this sun-facing side can reach 420 and 30 degrees, hot enough to melt lead and aluminum alike. In the day's full blaze, even the strongest materials warp, fatigue, surrender. No wind blows to carry heat away, it simply builds and builds until rocks fracture, expanding and contracting with each brutal cycle. When Messenger orbited here in 2011, its engineers coated the spacecraft with a sunshade capable of withstanding up to 700 joules, and even then the instruments occasionally overheated. Imagine designing something that can survive the sun's tantrum. You'd have to think like a lizard made of titanium. You squint toward the horizon and spot something strange, a faint shimmer, like liquid silver sliding along a ridge. At first you think it's heat distortion, but the mirage sharpens, and you realize you're seeing the boundary between surfaces expanding at different rates. The terrain itself seems to ripple, the skin of the planet twitching in thermal agony. Historians of geology still argue whether these daily cycles cause microquakes, tiny shifts too small for our instruments to notice, but enough to remind Mercury that it's alive in its own harsh way. Somewhere deep beneath your feet lies a metallic ocean, the planet's molten outer core. Despite its size, Mercury retains a surprising magnetic field, about 1% as strong as Earth's. That faint magnetism protects its surface just barely, deflecting a fraction of the solar wind that constantly bombards it. The rest slams directly into the crust, stripping atoms away into space. You imagine standing here long enough to watch a grain of dust slowly erode, atom by atom, carried off into a glowing sodium tail that stretches millions of kilometers behind the planet. It's like watching evaporation, but at the edge of existence. You turn in place, scanning the endless daylight. The landscape looks barren at first, but then you start to notice detail. Impact craters overlapping like fingerprints of forgotten ages, ridges crossing them like wrinkles on an ancient face. The largest basin, Caloris Planitia, lies somewhere beyond that horizon, 1,500 kilometers across, born from an impact so violent it likely sent shockwaves around the entire planet. Scientists believe that collision may have cracked Mercury's crust and triggered volcanic floods that resurfaced half the world. A single moment of cosmic chaos reshapes an entire planet's destiny. You try to picture it, an asteroid the size of Greece striking at 20 times the speed of sound, carving out a crater deeper than Everest is tall, and somehow the planet still survived. A soft chuckle escapes you. Resilient little rock, you murmur. Your words vanish instantly into vacuum, but the sentiment feels right. Mercury doesn't bother pretending to be hospitable. It just is. It exists by endurance alone. In some ways, it's the universe's ultimate minimalist. No air, no water, no frills, just raw material orbiting the furnace. You keep walking, noticing how the sunlight never changes colour here. There's no blue scattering, no rosy hues of morning or amber evenings. It's a world of direct contrast. White brilliance or black void, nothing between. You think about the phrase the sun's anvil because that's what this feels like. The surface hammered under constant heat until it rings with stillness. The airless silence feels heavy, as if even sound waves have given up trying to move. And yet, something about it is oddly peaceful. On Earth, heat usually comes with noise, the buzz of cicadas, the hum of machinery, the rush of waves evaporating into air. Here, heat exists in total quiet, a paradox that feels almost meditative. You imagine lying down on a sun-shielded slab, feeling the vibration of distant impacts resonating through the ground. It's the kind of silence that teaches patience, a cosmic sauna without steam, just eternity. Then, as if to remind you that beauty here is always conditional, your visor's internal readout blinks an imaginary temperature warning. The radiation flux spikes, solar wind intensifies. A coronal ejection must have just occurred, a solar storm blasting plasma toward Mercury at hundreds of kilometers per second. Real probes experience this regularly. When the Messenger spacecraft was in orbit, it detected magnetic storms powerful enough to twist its instruments. You feel an invisible pressure on your skin, a phantom tingle from the imagined storm brushing past. You're reminded that Mercury's proximity to the Sun isn't just scenic, it's perilous. A thin grin crosses your lips. You've come all this way to experience peace at the edge of annihilation, and somehow that feels very human. We seek extremes because they mirror something in us. Our curiosity, our defiance, our need to touch the flame and see what happens. Mercury is that instinct made planetary, a small, fragile world orbiting so close to destruction that it glows from sheer audacity. The light has reached its zenith now, flattening the landscape until distance disappears. You could walk forever and never seem to move. The heat radiating off the surface shimmers like invisible curtains, and for a moment, the entire world looks liquid. You blink, dizzy from brightness, and the illusion breaks, the horizon solid again, the silence absolute. It occurs to you that if day is this overwhelming, night must be its mirror, absolute cold, a silence so deep even thought might freeze. But that will come later. For now, you remain in the furnace where the sun reigns unchallenged, and the only sound is your imagination whispering beneath the roar of impossible light. You start moving toward the darker edge again, chasing the faint promise of shadow across a surface that looks too bright to belong to the physical world. The horizon ripples, and the airless light turns brittle, breaking into jagged gumuts as you walk. The heat at your back feels personal now, like a stare that doesn't blink. The thought makes you smirk. On Mercury, paranoia isn't a symptom, it's survival. Somewhere behind you, rocks expand in the solar blast, while ahead, the darkness pools like ink. You aim for that ink. You aim for the cold. The transition happens fast, though you're moving slowly. Within just a few dozen steps, the ground dulls from blazing silver to muted grey. The sunlight thins, scattering less as the terrain rises into shadow. Ahead, craters gape wide and deep, their rims outlined in sharp, high-contrast light. They look less like depressions and more like wounds the planet never bothered to heal. And then you see it, a crater whose interior glows faintly blue under the starlight. You stop, realizing what you're looking at isn't light at all, but reflection. Ice! It shouldn't be possible, and yet there it is. A gleam of frost where sunlight never reaches. These permanently shadowed regions, cold traps, scientists call them, exist near Mercury's poles. Because the planet's tilt is almost non-existent, the sun never climbs high enough to illuminate these depths. Temperatures there can fall below 80 degrees, cold enough to keep water ice stable for billions of years. Messenger confirmed it in 2012, radar-bright patches at the poles, unmistakable signatures of frozen water. Historians of planetary science still argue about where that ice came from, delivered by comets, deposited by ancient volcanic steam, or both. But however it arrived, it has stayed. It's the universe's idea of irony. Ice on the hottest planet. You edge closer, lowering yourself into the twilight lip of the crater. The light fades until your surroundings look more like moonlight than sunlight, though there's no true air here to scatter it. The regolith crunches softly underfoot, not from sound but from vibration transmitted through your imaginary boots. The descent is steeper than expected, and you pause halfway down, glancing back at the razor-sharp slice of sunlight above. The upper rim burns like a halo. It's strange, almost beautiful. Hell above, glacier below. You reach the floor of the crater, and the temperature plummets in your mind, crisp and absolute. The ground sparkles faintly, tiny reflective flecks embedded in the dust. As you kneel and brush your glove across the surface, a shiver of wonder runs through you. Real ice. On Mercury. It feels like finding a snowflake in a furnace. The ice hides beneath a protective layer of dark, carbon-rich dust, shielding it from even the faintest sunlight that might stray across the crater's edge. Without that insulating blanket, it would have vaporized eons ago. You imagine standing here in reality, a human explorer encased in a reflective suit, helmet lights catching on crystalline patches. The irony would be thick enough to taste. You'd be standing closer to the sun than any other body could bear, yet surrounded by ice that predates human civilization. Messenger's instruments even detected traces of organic molecules mixed within these frozen deposits, hinting that Mercury might have gathered the same building blocks of life that once reigned upon Earth. Not enough to spark biology, but enough to whisper, "We all began from the same dust." The silence down here feels different from the silence on the plain above. There, the quiet rang like heat. Here it feels muffled, heavy. You look around and realize the crater walls block the sun entirely. The stars are visible again, faint but steady, scattered across a sky untouched by atmosphere. You pick out a few constellations that look warped by the sun's glare, and for a moment, you think you see Earth, a tiny blue dot hugging the darkness. It's too small to be comforting, yet too familiar to ignore. You start to wonder what the first humans will think when they visit this place for real. Maybe it'll be part of a research mission decades from now, after the European-Japanese spacecraft Bepi Colombo has finished mapping every detail. They'll find these ice deposits, set up instruments, maybe even scoop samples into containers cooled by perpetual night. You grin at the thought. Human beings bringing heat to the only truly cold place on Mercury. We're great at missing irony on a cosmic scale. You sit down at the crater's center, cross-legged like some sunburned monk at prayer. Your visor dims automatically to account for starlight, and for a long while, nothing so moves. The planet itself seems to hum faintly beneath you, probably the echo of your own heartbeat in this stillness. You start to picture the deep layers below, where Mercury's iron core continues to churn, powering a magnetic field no one expected. That field, faint as it is, sweeps across even this crater, deflecting just enough solar wind to spare the ice from total annihilation. Somewhere between scientific fascination and awe, you realize something else. This is as close to equilibrium as Mercury ever gets. On the sunward side, heat consumes. On the night side, cold devours. But here, within this shadow, there's a fragile balance, a pocket of endurance in a world designed for extremes. The idea feels oddly human again. We survive not in comfort, but in the thin spaces between what burns and what freezes. You reach down, scoop a handful of dark powder, and let it fall slowly from your glove. The grains drift lazily before hitting the ground with a faint, silent puff. They'll stay there forever unless something disturbs them, a meteorite impact, a quake, or the long, slow breath of solar radiation. Mercury doesn't have wind or rain to erase footprints, which means every mark, every motion could last for millions of years. The thought gives you a small thrill. Even if no one else comes here, a trace of your imagined visit might linger, a ghost pressed into the frozen dust. Eventually you rise and start back toward the rim. Climbing feels heavier than descending, though gravity here is only a third of Earth's. You glance over your shoulder once more at the glimmer of ice in the dark and feel something like reverence. For all its hostility, Mercury guards its secrets with surprising tenderness. Ice at the poles, metal in the core, silence everywhere in between. When you reach the lip again, sunlight cuts across your vision like a blade, harsh but honest. You step back into the heat, the cold fading from memory as quickly as it appeared. The crater behind you sinks back into shadow, sealing its secret under billions of years of quiet. Mercury's poles hold both the faintest glimmer of life's ingredients and the clearest proof that even in chaos, stillness endures. Is the planet's little paradox, frozen perfectly at the edge of the sun's reach, where the silence, for once, feels like mercy. You climb back up from the shadowed crater, and the sun greets you again with all the subtlety of an interrogation lamp. The heat rushes back like a living thing, and the quiet emptiness seems to pulse with invisible energy. You pause at the rim, breathing out an imaginary sigh, and for a moment, your thoughts drift from geology to pathology. Mercury, named for the fleet-footed messenger of the Roman gods. The name feels ironic now. Nothing here moves fast except sunlight and time itself. But then again, myth always had a sense of humour. In Roman lore, Mercury was the god of travellers, traders and thieves, a trickster with wings on his sandals and a grin that probably knew too much. His Greek counterpart, Hermes, carried messages between gods and mortals, slipping through shadows and secrets alike. It's strangely fitting that this smallest, swiftest planet bears his name, darting close to the sun as though delivering messages no one else dares to carry. You imagine the old astronomers watching Mercury flicker at dawn, moving so quickly that it vanished before they could trace its path. To them, it must have seemed mischievous, a cosmic courier that refused to sit still long enough for study. You start walking again, the ground shimmering under the weight of sunlight. The horizon tilts slightly, and the planet's curvature makes every step feel like you're walking along the edge of a marble spinning too close to a flame. Historians still argue whether ancient civilizations ever truly understood Mercury's orbit. The Babylonians tracked it as early as the 2nd millennium BCE, calling it Nabu, the god of wisdom and writing. To them, its shifting appearance at sunrise and sunset represented the dual nature of intellect, bright and fleeting, brilliant yet hard to hold. You smile at that. If only they knew that the real Mercury is half metal, half mystery, perpetually burned and frozen at once. Your visor display flickers faintly, and you imagine the planet's slow pulse beneath your boots, a rotation so deliberate that one Mercury day equals almost 2 of its years. Time itself feels stretched thin here, elastic and uncertain. You think about how Hermes was said to move between worlds effortlessly, unbound by time or space. Maybe that myth wasn't wrong. Maybe Mercury has always been a threshold, neither fully of the light nor of the dark, existing in a twilight of its own making. You glance upward again, squinting at the relentless brilliance. The sun dominates everything here, but somewhere just beyond its glare, you can almost picture the ancient gods peering down, amused. "You wanted to visit my world," Mercury might say. "Let's see if you can keep up." The planet spins so slowly that its surface temperature lags behind its daylight, creating zones where the ground is cooling while the sun still climbs. You step through one of these invisible gradients, half furnace, half fridge, and feel the phantoms shift against your skin. To your left, a long escarpment stretches across the plain like the spine of a sleeping titan. These ridges, known as lobate scarps, formed when Mercury's interior cooled and contracted, forcing the crust to buckle. Some run for hundreds of kilometers, towering higher than any canyon wall on Earth. Messenger mapped them in exquisite detail, revealing that they cross even the youngest craters, meaning the planet is still shrinking, still reshaping itself after billions of years. Historians of planetary science still argue whether that cooling is gradual or episodic, whether Mercury creaks constantly or sighs in sudden bursts. Either way, you're standing on a world slowly folding inward, as if trying to hug itself tighter against the cold. As you walk along the scarp's ridge, the terrain beneath your boots changes colour, from pale grey to deep charcoal, streaked with orange tints where space weathering has altered the minerals. You spot something glinting on a nearby slope, a cluster of strange rounded hollows. They look almost like bubbles frozen mid-pop. These hollows, discovered by Messenger, are among Mercury's weirdest features. Shallow depressions that seem to form when volatile elements vaporize under solar bombardment. Their bright interiors contrast sharply with the darker surrounding rock, making them stand out like fresh wounds in an ancient hide. Scientists still debate what exactly causes them, but the leading theory involves the planet's surface literally boiling away. You shake your head softly. Mercury doesn't erode through rain or wind, it exfoliates through sunlight. The ground hums faintly beneath your feet, or maybe that's your imagination catching up to the silence again. You pause and look back toward the crater you left behind. From this height, it looks almost like Castilla. A silver coin pressed into the dark plain. The shadow inside it doesn't shift at all. It's an eternal night, just a few hundred meters away. You think about how Hermes was also the guide of souls, the one who led travelers into the underworld. Maybe Mercury, the planet, plays a similar role, a liminal body orbiting between creation and decay, life and oblivion. Your suit's imaginary sensors display the solar wind flux increasing again. Tiny charged particles stream from the sun, slamming into the surface at hundreds of kilometers per second. You know that each impact knocks atoms loose, forming the tenuous exosphere that trails behind the planet. Under certain conditions, these sodium atoms glow faintly, creating an invisible tail stretching millions of kilometers into space. Mercury, the eternal messenger, leaving a trail of light behind as it races past the sun. You can't help but think that somewhere Hermes would approve. You stop at the edge of the ridge and look outward. The horizon blurs under the glare, and the sun, impossibly close, impossibly steady, burns a hole through the void. The silence feels deeper here, but not empty. It's the silence of purpose, of something ancient and exact, continuing without hesitation. You find yourself whispering, "All right, messenger, what's the message?" If the planet could answer, it would probably shrug in molten indifference. Or maybe it already has answered, just not in language humans recognize. Maybe its message is endurance, the art of existing between destruction and persistence, of carrying heat and cold, chaos and calm in that same orbit. As you stand there, the heat bends the light around the rocks, distorting their edges until they seem to sway. For a second, the ridge looks like a set of wings, dark, metallic, half open. You blink, and it's gone, just another trick of the furnace horizon. But the symbolism lingers. Mercury, the winged messenger, the trickster, the survivor. You smile despite yourself, thinking how fitting it is that even here, mythology refuses to die. You start walking again, the ground glittering faintly beneath the relentless sun, and somewhere deep inside you carry the strange comfort of knowing that even in a place this quiet, stories still fly. You've been walking for what feels like forever now, though on Mercury, forever could mean almost anything. Time stretches and folds in strange ways when a single sunrise takes weeks. Ahead, the landscape begins to rise, a broken sweep of cliffs and shattered plains that looks like a battlefield between rock and gravity. The colours are muted under the relentless white glare, but you can still see differences. Dark basalt plains merging with lighter ancient crust, as though two different versions of the planet collided and never bothered to reconcile. And maybe, in a sense, that's exactly what happened. Mercury's origin story is one of cosmic violence. Billions of years ago, during the solar system's chaotic youth, protoplanets clashed like celestial billiard balls. One of them, perhaps Mercury itself in its earliest fuller form, might have been struck by a massive impactor, so large and so fast that it ripped away most of Mercury's rocky mantle, leaving behind only a dense metallic core wrapped in a thin crust. What remains today is a world that's about 70% metal by mass, a cosmic cannonball with a skin of stone. Historians and astrophysicists still argue over the details. Was it one catastrophic hit that stripped Mercury bare, or a slow attrition of smaller impacts that whittled it down to its dense heart? The debate goes on, like Mercury itself, circling endlessly around the sun. You crouch down and pick up a chunk of rock, or at least you imagine doing it. It's brittle, fractured, a patchwork of impact glass and metallic flecks. The sunlight dances off its surface, reflecting both history and heat. You turn it over in your glove, thinking how each fragment here might be older than the continents of Earth. The first crust of Mercury solidified over 4 billion years ago, back when the sun was still young and temperamental. You grin softly, realizing that in a sense, you're holding a piece of the solar system's autobiography. As you rise, you spot a distant basin rim stretching across the horizon like the rim of a colossal bowl. The scale of it defies comprehension until you remember, this world is small, yes, but its wounds are enormous. When the ancient asteroid that formed Caloris Basin struck, the energy released was so great it likely melted the crust for hundreds of kilometers around and sent seismic waves rippling straight through the planet. On the opposite side, directly antipodal to the basin, Messenger found chaotic terrain, a landscape of twisted hills and fractured ridges that look as though the crust simply came apart. It's believed those ripples converge there, shaking the ground into madness. The planet bears the scars still, frozen into stone like memory that refuses to fade. You begin your climb up a low ridge, the slope crumbly and uneven. Every step dislodges tiny plumes of dust that rise and fall in eerie silence. Without an atmosphere, there's no wind to scatter them, no air resistance to slow them down. They simply arc through space and land precisely where gravity dictates. It's beautiful in its precision, like the choreography of a silent ballet. You imagine how it must have looked billions of years ago when molten rock surged through these cracks, flooding basins with lava. For a time, Mercury was a glowing ember, its surface alive with rivers of fire. Then, like a forge cooling after a final strike, it hardened, leaving behind a metallic sheen that still glints under the light. The climb grows steeper. You pause halfway up and glance back. The horizon stretches endlessly, a silver ocean of stone. In the far distance, the sun blazes, so bright it almost flattens the view. You think again of that violent past, how everything you see, every ridge and plain, is the result of collisions so fierce they redefined what solid meant. There's something humbling in it, a reminder that creation often comes disguised as catastrophe. You reach the ridgetop and stand still, letting your mind wander through deep time. Imagine the proto-Mercury, larger, rounder, with a thicker crust. Imagine the moment of impact, an intruder the size of Mars slamming into it, atmosphere stripped away, oceans of magma churning in the aftermath. You can almost hear it, the roar of molten rock, the hiss of vaporized iron, the long cooling silence that followed. Historians of planetary formation still debate whether Mercury's massive core is the leftover remnant of that destruction, or the result of solar radiation burning away lighter elements before the planet could fully form. Either way, the message is the same. What survives is what endures the fire. You glance down at your boots, dusted with pale grey powder. Somewhere beneath your feet lies an iron heart that takes up more than half the planet's radius. That core still spins, sluggish but strong, generating Mercury's faint magnetic field. A heartbeat left over from the days when the solar system was still learning to breathe. You picture it, a molten ocean of iron, swirling like liquid night, encased in synths. It's both terrifying and beautiful, the way something so small can contain so much power. Your visor display flickers again, imagining sensor readings, magnetic anomalies, gravity gradients, seismic echoes from deep below. You remember reading about the Messenger mission's gravity mapping, how scientists detected slight bulges in Mercury's gravitational pull that hinted at molten metal still moving within. It's proof that the planet hasn't gone completely cold, that beneath all the stillness there's motion, a quiet persistence that refuses to fade. You start walking along the ridge, tracing the seam between two types of terrain, smooth plains on one side, heavily cratered highlands on the other. The contrast is stark, like two chapters of history pressed together. On one side, youth and lava, the last gasp of Mercury's inner heat. On the other, scars of impacts from an era when space was still wild with debris. You can almost read the story like an ancient text carved in stone, each crater a syllable in the planet's long autobiography. The ridge begins to descend toward another basin, this one smaller, but filled with smooth, dark material that glows faintly in the harsh light. You realise this must be a volcanic plain, one of the many that Messenger photographed, evidence that even after its birth trauma, Mercury wasn't done remaking itself. Volcanism reshaped nearly half the planet's surface long after the impact ceased. The idea makes you chuckle softly. Even in the aftermath of catastrophe, Mercury couldn't resist redecorating. You stop again at the basin's edge, your shadow long and sharp on the silver-grey ground. The silence feels thicker here, as though the world is holding its breath. You think about the ancient collisions that forged this place, about the forces that sculpted a planet from the remnants of ruin. Then almost reverently you whisper to yourself, so this is what survival looks like. Mercury doesn't answer, of course. It never does. It just keeps circling the sun, scarred, shrunken, and shining like a survivor who no longer needs to explain how it lived. The ridge gradually flattens beneath your feet, and the view opens again, an endless quilt of craters, cliffs, and folded plains stitched together by time itself. The sun hangs low on the horizon now, but low here is deceptive. The star never really sets quickly on Mercury. It moves with a stubborn slowness, as if reluctant to let go of its closest child. You glance back at the scarps trailing behind you, those immense wrinkles that lace the landscape like stretch marks on a world that's been trying to shrink back into itself for billions of years. They look almost alive, their curves and ridges frozen mid-flex. You kneel and press your gloved hand against the ground, feeling the illusion of vibration, the imagined echo of Mercury's interior slowly cooling. It's strange to think of a planet shrinking. You picture its metallic heart gradually solidifying, pulling the crust inward until it buckles. Scientists call these formations lobate scarps, but the term feels too tidy for what they represent. Entire mountain ranges raised not by tectonic collisions like Earth's, but by the simple fact that Mercury is contracting. The planet is literally folding itself smaller, like paper curling under a flame. Messenger's high-resolution mapping revealed hundreds of these scarps, some stretching for over 1,000 kilometers. The longest, Discovery Rupes, rises more than 1 kilometer high, a titanic wall born from planetary self-doubt. You walk along the base of one now, the light casting deep shadows that make it look like a collapsed fortress. Historians of planetary science still argue whether Mercury's contraction happened all at once, an ancient global spasm, or if it continues even now, millimeters per century. Either way, the result is the same. The planet you stand on is still changing shape, slow as glaciers, silent as sleep. You start to climb one of the smaller scarps, each step sending small cascades of dust tumbling down the slope. The rock is jagged, fractured into plates that crunch beneath your weight. Without air or moisture, Erosion here comes only from impacts and temperature swings. Each night, when the surface cools by hundreds of degrees, it contracts and cracks, and when the sun returns, it expands again. Over time, those cycles grind stone to powder, a rhythm of destruction repeated for eons. You chuckle softly. Even planets, it seems, live on stress and repetition. As you reach the top, the view expands into an ocean of stone so vast that your sense of scale gives up trying. The horizon curves visibly, the planet's smallness revealed in the delicate bend of light. The airless sky is still a muted grey, and the sun's reflection on distant ridges glitters like scattered coins. You remember reading that Mercury's albedo, its reflectivity, is lower than the moon's. Despite its brightness near the sun, the surface itself is surprisingly dark, coated with a layer of graphite-rich material. Some researchers believe that this carbon came from primordial crust buried deep within the planet, later exposed by impacts. Others suspect it arrived from space, delivered by comets and carbonaceous asteroids. Historians still debate the origin, but either way, Mercury wears its darkness proudly. You run your gloved fingers over the rock and notice how fine the dust is, smooth, almost oily in its way. Space weathering has polished it for billions of years. Solar wind particles and micrometeoroid strikes have melted and fused the topmost grains, forming a thin glassy patina. Every surface here has been kissed by violence and light again and again, until it shines with quiet endurance. You whisper, "You've been here too long," half to the rock, half to yourself. A small crater interrupts the ridge ahead, shallow and circular, its rim bright against the darker plain. You make your way toward it, stepping carefully down its slope. The interior glows faintly, as if dusted with frost. But you know it's not ice here, not this close to the equator. It's reflective salts, likely formed when volatile materials evaporated under the sun's heat, leaving behind thin mineral crusts. When Messenger first photographed similar deposits, scientists were baffled. These bright spots hinted that Mercury's surface chemistry was more complex than expected. Historians of planetary mineralogy still argue whether those salts came from volcanic gases or solar radiation altering the crust. Whatever their source, they catch the light like tiny mirrors scattered across the grey expanse. At the crater's centre, you stop and sit for a while, the silence pressing close. The scarp behind you looms like a frozen wave mid-crash. You can almost feel the tension that shaped it, the inward pull of a planet cooling too fast for its skin to keep up. Somewhere deep below, that contraction still continues. You imagine the metallic layers settling and sighing, slow tectonic whispers echoing through iron and stone. It's a comforting thought in a strange way. Mercury might look lifeless, but it's never truly still. You look up again at the vast curve of the horizon. The sun hovers at an odd angle, distorted slightly by the lack of air. You realise that from where you stand, the next sunset is still weeks away. The day stretches on endlessly, and yet the light never softens. You think about time again, how Mercury's 3-2 spin-orbit resonance means it rotates 3 times for every 2 laps around the sun. That quirk of celestial mathematics means some regions spend so long under sunlight that you could practically name the shadows as they shift. You grin quietly. Slow morning takes on an entirely new meaning here. The quiet hum in your mind grows deeper, almost soothing. Maybe it's just imagination, but you like to think it's the planet itself speaking through vibration, the deep, slow heartbeat of metal cooling in the dark. You tap your boot gently against the ground and imagine the sound it would make if there were air, a low metallic gong echoing through endless emptiness. You rise again, brushing imaginary dust from your suit, and look down at your footprints. They're sharp-edged, perfect, untouched. Without atmosphere or weather, they'll stay that way indefinitely. Every step here is permanent, every mark is history. You wonder if that's what Mercury's scarps are too, giant planetary footprints, impressions left behind by time itself, walking across the crust. The thought it makes you smile. Maybe, just maybe, planets dream of their younger selves the way humans do, curling inward as they cool, remembering their molten youth. You turn toward the horizon, your path lit by a light that feels ancient and raw. The scarps cast across long shadows behind you, stretching like wrinkles of age across the planet's face. And as you walk, you realize Mercury's quiet lesson. Everything, no matter how small, bears the weight of its own history. Even the smallest world carries its scars with grace. the light has changed again, just slightly. A subtle tilt in tone, a whisper of gold softening the silver glare. You're still walking along the scarp line, tracing its ancient fold, when your visor display flickers with a faint magnetic anomaly. You stop instinctively, staring down at the ground as if you might see the invisible. Of course, there's nothing to see, but the thought alone is enough to quicken your curiosity, because here, on this small, metal-heavy world, an invisible force still hums beneath the surface, a ghost of magnetism that shouldn't exist but stubbornly does. Mercury has a magnetic field, a weak one, barely 1% the strength of Earth's, but its very existence defies logic. Small planets should have cooled long ago, their liquid cores frozen solid, their dynamo engines silenced. Yet Mercury's field still flickers faintly across the void, whispering to the solar wind. When Mariner 10 first flew by in 1974, scientists were stunned to detect it. Before that, everyone assumed the planet was geologically dead. Messenger later confirmed what no one had expected. Mercury's outer core remains molten, still swirling with metallic motion. You grin softly. This planet may be small, but it refuses to stop spinning its secrets. You crouch and press a gloved hand to the surface, half expecting to feel a pulse. Nothing, of course, but you like the idea. Somewhere beneath you, liquid iron churns in convection currents, creating faint magnetic ripples that wrap around the planet like a tattered cloak. Solar wind particles stream in constantly from the sun, hammering at that field, distorting it into a long comet-like tail that trails behind Mercury. Sometimes, when solar storms flare, that tail glows faintly with charged sodium atoms, an invisible banner waving defiantly in the cosmic wind. You stand again and glance upward. The sunlight is relentless, but you imagine the invisible interactions happening all around you. Charged protons deflected, electrons trapped, magnetic lines stretching and snapping like taut strings. Mercury's magnetosphere might be fragile, but it's fierce in its persistence. You can almost feel it brushing past you like static, wrapping you in a barely there shiver of energy. It's not strong enough to protect against radiation, not like Earth's wide magnetic shield, but it's proof that the planet still has a heartbeat. Historians of planetary magnetism still argue about how that's possible. Some say the core remains partially molten because Mercury's composition, rich in sulfur, lowers its form at a freezing point. Others suspect that tidal forces from the sun stir its interior, keeping it liquid through frictional heat. Either way, it means Mercury isn't just a relic. It's still moving, still alive in ways we didn't expect. You smile at that thought. Small things, after all, have a knack for surviving longer than logic predicts. You begin walking again, following the faint line of the magnetic anomaly your visor pretends to display. The ground looks ordinary. Dust, fractured rock, scattered pebbles, but you imagine the field lines curling beneath it, invisible threads looping and twisting through the iron below. The idea feels comforting somehow. A planet with an iron heart and a magnetic soul. You pause at a ridge where the terrain dips sharply into a shallow valley. From here, the horizon tilts slightly, giving you a broader view of the land below. It looks like a frozen sea, ripples of stone stretching for kilometers. You realize these are remnants of ancient lava plains, hardened billions of years ago and later fractured by cooling. The sunlight glints off the smoother patches, making them appear almost fluid again, as if Mercury's molten past were still trying to remember itself. In the distance, a faint glow catches your eye, a streak of yellow-orange that seems to float above the surface. You blink, and the illusion wavers. It's not light exactly, but an after-image created by sodium atoms escaping from the crust. Under intense solar bombardment, Mercury's surface releases these atoms into the exosphere, where they scatter sunlight into faint, ghostly hues. If you could see it from orbit right now, Mercury would appear to have a shimmering tail stretching away from the sun, a comet made of dust and metal. You imagine standing there during one of those sodium storms, the faint luminescence painting the horizon in subtle golds and blues. No sound, no movement, just light behaving like breath. Messenger's instruments once recorded those sodium emissions flickering in real time, proof that Mercury's thin exosphere is constantly being replenished by its own erosion. A strange form of immortality. The planet feeds the void with fragments of itself, atom by atom, yet remains whole. You whisper, "You never really stop giving, do you?" The sun's intensity deepens again, pulling your attention upward. You can almost sense the waves of radiation slamming into the planet, testing its resilience. The magnetosphere bends under the pressure, then springs back, forming eddies and vortices in plasma. Scientists have compared those magnetic fluctuations to Earth's auroras, though here they're invisible, silent, and deadly. You like to imagine that, if your eyes could see in charged particles, the space around Mercury would shimmer with luminous ribbons, delicate and fierce, wrapping the planet in a ghost-like armour. You take a few slow steps forward, letting the quiet settle again. It's strange how easy it is to forget the danger here. The silence is so total, the light so constant that it lulls you into calm. And yet, under your feet, magnetic lines are twisting, particles are colliding, atoms are being stripped and flung into space. Mercury may look peaceful, but every second is a battle between energy and endurance. A faint vibration hums through your imagination, your brain supplying the sound of an electromagnetic pulse passing through the crust. You think about how fragile this balance is, how a slightly weaker field might mean Mercury's surface would vanish entirely over cosmic time, but it holds, it always holds. Like the god it's named for, Mercury moves swiftly but never loses its footing, darting between destruction and preservation with impossible grace. You sit down on a nearby boulder and glance back at the trail of footprints you've left. They look impossibly small against the vast plain, but they're there. Tiny indentations in dust that will never blow away. You think of them as magnetic signatures of their own, each step marking a small pulse of human curiosity on a world that doesn't know you exist. You grin softly, leaning back on your hands, imagining that deep below, the planet is aware of the intrusion and hums a low metallic note in response. For a moment you close your eyes, you picture magnetic lines curling around you like threads of invisible silk, each one connecting you to the molten heart far below. The silence feels full again, full of unseen motion, unseen protection. You breathe, even though breathing here is only pretend, and the thought arrives quietly. Maybe the universe's smallest worlds hum the loudest songs if you just learn how to listen. You ease back into the moving ribbon of twilight, that skinny belt where Mercury pretends it isn't trying to either flambe or cryo-freeze you. Here, the light softens enough that you can pay attention to the delicate stuff, the chemistry that doesn't need an atmosphere to have a social life. You tilt your head, and for a breathless second you think you catch a faint tint along the limb, the slightest ghost of colour. It's not sky, it's not even air, strictly speaking. It's Mercury's exosphere, a whisper-thin cloud of atoms so sparse that each one could travel kilometres before bumping into a friend. If Earth's atmosphere is a crowded cafe, Mercury's is one moody poet at a corner table, nursing a single sodium atom like it's a life choice. You crouch and tap a knuckle against the regolith, watching nothing happen, which is exactly the point. With no wind and no weather, chemistry here is driven by sunlight, micrometeoroids, and the occasional solar tantrum. Photons beat the surface like a drum, knocking atoms free in a process with the charming name of photon-stimulated desorption. Micrometeoroids arrive like uninvited confetti, sputtering material off the top grains. And the solar wind, those streams of charged particles, peel off atoms the way a day at the beach peels your shoulders. The peeled bits don't hang together, they form an exosphere of loners: sodium, Na, potassium, K, calcium, Ca, even a spritz of magnesium and helium. Think of it as planetary perfume with excellent top notes and absolutely no staying power. On nights near true darkness, Earth-based telescopes have caught Mercury's golden sodium shining. The exosphere actually glows in the orange-yellow lines of sodium under sunlight, a subtle neon that trails away from the planet like a comet's tail. In 1985, astronomers first spotted those sodium emissions from Earth, a quiet revelation that the smallest planet was shedding atoms like glitter. Later, MESSENGER confirmed and mapped them, showing dawn-dusk variations. Sodium popping off more on the morning side, like the surface needs coffee before the sun's full interview. Historians of astronomy still argue whether micrometeoroid showers or solar wind bursts play the starring role in those dawn spikes. The answer is probably both, plus whatever mischief Mercury invents on a Tuesday. You stand and sweep your gaze along the terminator, the moving line between day and night. Here, chemistry lives on edges. Sodium and potassium are volatile enough that a photon's nudge sends them on sabbaticals. Calcium needs a bit more violence. Micrometeoroids do the honours, their high-speed kisses vaporizing tiny plumes. Each atom's fate is a choose-your-own-adventure. Some hop once and land again. Others get enough push from radiation pressure to be blown into a proper tail, a ribbon of atoms streaming anti-sunward for millions of kilometres. You picture Mercury trailing a faint saffron veil through space. The solar system's most minimalist fashion statement. If planets had Instagram, Mercury would post one artsy sodium long exposure and turn off comments. What strikes you standing inside this chemical whisper is how mercurial, yes, you're allowed one pun per section, these emissions are. They flare during meteor streams, fade in quiet spells, and bend under magnetic gusts. The sodium tail brightens at certain orbital angles, then thins out like a sigh. In your mind's eye you see it from above, the planet as a bright bead, a thread of colour unspooling behind it, crinkling with solar weather. Messenger once watched the magnetotail fill with dynamic structures, flux ropes and reconnection signatures, while instruments caught calcium and sodium changing by the hour. The entire system is a delicate tug-of-war between sunlight, gravity, magnetism, and the planet's stubborn surface chemistry. It's not weather, not really, it's choreography. You brush your glove over a rock, and it gives you nothing. Silent, compliant, unwilling to admit it's part of a slow, steady exhale. But it is. Each grain has absorbed billions of years of cosmic seasoning. Implanted hydrogen from the solar wind, implanted helium, let's just say Mercury's skincare routine is basically microdermabrasion by the universe. First joke, Mercury doesn't have pores, but it does a mean exfoliation. Over time, that bombardment darkens minerals, creates thin glassy coatings, and primes the surface to release atoms the way a heated pan pops oil. You glance upward again and imagine seeing the sodium with special goggles. You'd watch the brightest glow cluster near the early morning terminator, then sweep anti-sunward into the tail, a soft fan caught in radiation pressure. The potassium would be subtler, the calcium spikier, its distribution more patchy, like freckles scattered by micrometeoroid freckles. The whole exosphere would look like a quiet festival lantern, delicate, temporary, and more beautiful because it refuses to stay still. You find that oddly soothing, impermanence but with flair. Mainstream fact time slips in like a polite guest. Mariner 10, in 1974-75, first found that Mercury possessed a magnetic field and detected a hint of an atmosphere so thin it was nearly academic to call it one. That discovery set the stage for the sodium revelations a decade later, and the detailed messenger chemistry maps in the 2010s. If you're counting, that's the arc. Shock, curiosity, obsession, the classic three-step human response to a planet that plays hard to get. You let your thoughts drift to the fringe, because it's quiet and the brain likes company. There's an old speculative tidbit that pops up sometimes, that ancient alchemists, obsessed with quicksilver, mercury the element, believed cinnabar's red powder could heal bones, an idea that aged about as well as lead paint. Still, the association between the planet and the element refused to die. Even now, people hear mercury and think thermometers and hatters, not sodium tails flowing like ghost rivers. Quirky, yes, useful, only as a reminder that names carry baggage, and sometimes that baggage is a 16th century medical pamphlet. Second joke, Mercury the planet would like to distance itself from your Victorian hat. Thanks. You track the sodium tail in your imagination as it thickens, then thins, breathing in slow motion. There's a rhythm to it tied to Mercury's eccentric orbit. The planet speeds up near perihelion and slows at aphelion, its distance from the sun changing by tens of millions of kilometers. That shift changes solar pressure, micrometeoroid encounter rates, and magnetospheric stress. Scholars still debate whether seasonal hot poles in Mercury's frame enhance exospheric release, or whether micrometeoroid streams like the Geminids do most of the heavy lifting. Historians still argue whether the dawn spikes are primarily meteor-driven or magnetically juiced, you murmur, giving the universe a diplomatic shrug. A faint mental chime, your imaginary instruments note a burst of potassium near the horizon. You picture a micrometeoroid vapor plume in miniature, a champagne pop in vacuum, the atoms flying ballistic arcs and falling back in slow parabolas. No breeze catches them, no cloud gathers them. Gravity writes the whole script, then sunlight edits. It's elegant, if a little ruthless. Third joke. Mercury's weather app has two icons, sun and still sun, with a push alert for surprise sodium. You move again, keeping pace with the Terminator, and think about what this all means for the future explorer. Navigation by colour, perhaps, knowing the sodium glow swells on the morning side, dimming toward evening. Map making that includes invisible halos and one-atom-wide winds. Instruments listening for atoms popping off like distant popcorn, a soundtrack too subtle for ears but perfect for spectrometers. The path forward for humans here might not be about air and water, but about learning to live with dust that sings light back at the sun. The ground under you glints. Those bright patches again, maybe salts, maybe freshly exposed hollows refusing to dull. You remember the hollows you saw earlier, as if the surface boils away in tiny scoops. Could those be local atom factories, hotspots where exosphere gets extra seasoning? Scientists have floated the idea, then batted it back and forth like a ping-pong ball. That's how knowledge works here. Patient, iterative, a series of gentle maybes drifting toward a cautious probably. You stop, letting twilight slide over your boots and look up to where the sodium tail would be, a gauzy veil you can't see with naked eyes. You feel an odd kinship with it. It's the record of a world that looks like stone but behaves like breath, constant, quiet, resilient. Mercury gives itself to space atom by atom and somehow remains entirely itself. There's a lesson in that, soft as dust. Endurance doesn't have to be loud. Sometimes it's a whisper of colour at the edge of a blazing sky. You keep walking until the light turns syrup thick, the glare behind you flattening into a hazy mirage that wavers and hums in the silence. You stop, not because you're tired, but because you notice something odd. There's a crater ahead, small and crisp-edged, its rim still gleaming where micrometeoroids haven't yet dulled the reflection. You imagine what it must have sounded like when the rock that made it arrived. A single, bright flash of kinetic poetry striking a world that can't carry sound. The idea of noise here is almost comic. Mercury has no atmosphere to carry a whisper, let alone an explosion. Everything happens in perfect, absolute quiet. You step closer, boots sinking slightly into dust as fine as smoke. The crater floor dips only a few meters, but its symmetry is flawless, a bowl of powdered silver. A few larger stones litter the rim, fragments that likely melted and refroze within seconds of impact. You look at them and can almost hear the echo that never was. That's the strange paradox here. Mercury is a world built by collisions but utterly devoid of their voice. Impacts carve, shape and sculpt everything, yet none of them ever truly sound like anything. They're the universe's loudest events performed in perfect mime. You kneel and tap a rock gently, knowing you'll never hear the tap. Even if you had real equipment, any vibration would die inside the stone, trapped without air to translate it into sound. You remember that Apollo astronauts on the moon used seismometers to listen through the ground rather than the air. Mercury too could speak through vibrations. If we ever placed sensors here, we'd hear the planet through its bones, subtle tremors from distant impacts, the slow settling of crust, maybe even deep metallic quakes from its shrinking core. Messenger hinted at tectonic stress patterns that might still trigger microquakes today. Historians of planetary seismology still argue whether those would register as sharp jolts or drawn-out murmurs. Either way, Mercury hums just below human hearing. You straighten and gaze across the plains. The silence isn't empty. It's thick, weighted, like the air before a storm back home. Except here, there will never be a storm. No wind, no rustle, no roll of thunder. Even dust behaves differently. When a micrometeoroid hits, it sprays debris in perfect arcs, each grain following a parabolic path until gravity brings it home. The entire event unfolds in slow motion, soundless but elegant, a ballet of ballistic physics. You imagine how it would look if you filmed it. Plumes of Glitzitia expanding and falling in stately grace. No whoosh, no crash, just geometry. You realize how much of human comfort depends on noise. On Earth, we measure existence in hums and breezes, in heartbeat echoes and background chatter. Here, there's nothing. The absence presses at you until your mind starts manufacturing phantom sounds, the faint hiss of your own blood, the imagined crunch of dust underfoot. Maybe even the echo of your own thoughts bouncing off your helmet. You chuckle softly. Mercury is the ultimate ASMR, except the S might stand for silence. You start walking again, tracing the edge of the crater. You picture the countless others scattered across this planet. Some so small you'd trip over them, others so vast they could swallow countries. The largest, Caloris Basin, was once thought to be so deep that it should have collapsed under its own weight, yet it remains a permanent scar. During Mariner 10's flyby, scientists realised that Mercury's far side contained strange jumbled terrain directly opposite Caloris, proof that seismic waves from the impact travelled through the planet and disrupted the crust halfway around the globe. Imagine that, an entire world ringing like a bell for millions of years, but no one there to hear it. You pause, leaning on an outcrop. The rock beneath you gleams faintly, tiny flecks of metal winking in the sun. Those metals act as natural antennas, briefly responding to the solar magnetic field. You fancy that if you pressed your ear to the stone, you might catch electromagnetic whispers instead of sound waves, a static murmur from the planet's magnetotail, brushing against solar wind. The thought makes you smile. Mercury's music exists. It's just in a register we haven't learned to appreciate. Far above, an imaginary meteor streaks silently across the daylight. You watch it vanish into brightness, picturing what would happen when it lands. The instantaneous shock, the bloom of melted rock, a fountain of incandescent dust that climbs high before freezing in place. Later, some of that dust will escape entirely, drawn into the sodium-coloured tail. The rest will settle back, layering the surface with new powder. Mercury's endless cycle of quiet renewal. Every crater you see is both an ending and a beginning, the punctuation marks in the planet's long, unspeaking sentence. You sit for a moment, letting the quiet stretch. You think about how much data future seismometers could collect if they were left here, listening to impacts, internal quakes, even thermal cracking as the planet cools. The patterns might reveal how thick the crust is, how deep the molten core goes. We'd learn to listen to Mercury through mathematics, translating vibrations into stories. Historians of exploration will one day argue whether the first true conversation with this planet happened not in words, but in waveforms. You look up again. The sun blazes so intensely that the shadows feel unreal, sharper than ink. Every stone, every ridge, every crater lip is outlined with surgical precision. Without an atmosphere, there's no haze, no softening of edges. It's visual silence now, clarity so pure it borders on surreal. You can almost sense why the ancients associated this world with intellect and speed. It cuts clean, wastes nothing, says only what physics requires. A stray thought sneaks in, playful as ever. If you tried to play music here, what would it be like? A speaker would vibrate in vain. No air means no sound. You would have to press your helmet against the speaker itself to feel the rhythm. Perhaps that's how Mercury listens, through vibration, alone. You smile at the absurdity, but keep the image. A lonely traveller pressing an ear to a rock, trying to catch the faint heartbeat of an entire planet. You stand again, dusting off your gloves, and continue along the crater's rim. The silence follows, loyal and complete. Every step you take leaves a mark that will outlast entire civilizations. You realise with a small chill of awe that you're walking through one of the universe's purest definitions of quiet. Not the absence of sound, but the presence of everything else. You stop and turn your gaze upward, letting the glare of the sun blur into a halo at the top of your visor. For all the stillness around you, Mercury hasn't exactly been shy about its stage appearances. Humanity's first introduction to this little world came not through imagination, but through the mechanical eyes of spacecraft, metal messengers chasing the messenger. You smile at the symmetry. The first one was Mariner 10, launched in 1973, when engineers wore wide ties and thought computers were the size of small cars. It became the first craft ever to visit Mercury, flying by 3 times between 1974 and 1975. In that brief dance, it revealed a world that looked hauntingly like the moon, yet radiated a personality all its own, smaller, denser, weirder. You picture it now on Mariner 10 gliding past, panels gleaming, snapping the first close-up portraits of a planet humanity had only seen as a bright, twitchy dot in the dawn sky. Those black and white mosaics showed a surface battered by craters and ridges, punctuated by the massive Caloris Basin. Back then, the photos stunned everyone. Mercury was supposed to be dull, an overcooked rock. Instead, it was sculpted and textured, alive in its silence. Historians of space exploration still argue whether Mariner's true legacy was scientific or poetic. Did it map Mercury, or did it teach us how to see it? You take a few steps across the plain, imagining what it must have looked like from the spacecraft's camera window. Each pixel was a secret unfolding, cliffs curling like parchment, lava plains frozen mid-flow, shadows drawn knife-thin by unfiltered light. The craft didn't orbit, it merely brushed past, gravity assisted by Venus, using ingenuity instead of brute force. That trick, fly by one world to reach another, became a celestial sleight of hand that every later mission borrowed. First joke. Mercury may be closest to the Sun, but Venus still had to give it a lift. Decades later, the second visitor arrived, NASA's Messenger, launched in 2004 and entering orbit in 2011 after an intricate 7-year journey of 6 flybys. It was small, about the size of a car, but heavier in secrets. Over 4 Earth years, it circled Mercury thousands of times, mapping the surface in colour, measuring the magnetic field, and sniffing the tenuous exosphere. It proved that Mercury's polar shadows hid genuine water ice. It also measured hollows and volcanic vents, confirmed the huge iron core, and charted those endless scarps you've been walking along. Each discovery twisted Mercury's reputation a little more, from dull rock to complex survivor. You glance to the horizon where the sunlight burns white. You think about how Messenger ended its mission, a deliberate crash in 2015, smashing into Mercury's surface at more than 14,000 kilometers per hour. It left a small crater, invisible from Earth but marked forever, in the data logs. There's a tenderness in that ending, an explorer joining the land it came to know. Somewhere under this dust lies the probe's final resting place, a human fingerprint pressed into alien silence. You murmur, "Good job, little messenger," and the words dissolve into nothing. As you walk, the imaginary telemetry scrolls through your mind, spectrometer readings, altitude tracks, the rhythmic pulse of data streaming across the solar wind to Earth. Messenger sent back over 250,000 images. Scientists pieced them together into a complete global mosaic, discovering subtle colour differences invisible to the naked eye, faint bluish patches where young material gleamed, ochre tones where ancient plains had darkened under cosmic weather. Mercury, it turned out, wasn't grey at all. It was a muted rainbow of minerals. You recall that surprising composite image, the planet glowing in blues and yellows like a bruise on the face of the sun. A memory stirs of one quirky moment. Messenger's instruments detected unexpected potassium, sulfur, and volatile compounds on the surface, ingredients that shouldn't have survived so close to the sun. Historians still argue whether those materials were trapped in Mercury's crust from birth or delivered by later impacts. The discovery upended textbook assumptions, proving that even at the solar furnace's doorstep, subtle chemistry can thrive. Second joke, Mercury apparently skipped the no volatile elements in the house rule, and still managed not to explode. You reach a cluster of low ridges, and your mind drifts to the images of Messenger's shadow crossing them, a small dark dot sliding across the planet it was mapping. For a few minutes during each orbit, the craft passed directly between Mercury and the Sun, projecting a perfect silhouette. Engineers called those moments geometry events. Poets might call them eclipses with personality. Either way, for those seconds, Mercury became both observer and observed, the Sun outlining the visitor in sharp relief. You pause to trace the arc of that memory into the future. Another mission, Bepi Colombo, is already on its way, launched in 2018 as a partnership between the European Space Agency and Japan's JAXA. Even now, it's looping through the inner solar system, performing its own gravity assist ballet before settling into orbit around Mercury. 2 orbiters will separate then, one to map the magnetic field, the other to study the surface and exosphere in unprecedented detail. You can almost see them in your imagination, twin glints of purpose approaching the dawn side, ready to pick up the story Messenger left behind. You look down at your hands, feeling the faint heat from the imaginary sun. You think about all those human machines, fragile, improbable, sent into a realm where lead would melt and shadow could kill. Each one a piece of thought turned tangible. There's something absurdly moving about it. Humanity, huddled on a cool blue planet, has already reached this furnace more than once, driven by nothing but curiosity. Historians of science will someday look back and marvel that we dared. But here, standing in the glare, it just feels natural. Mercury invites defiance. A gust of imagination brushes through you. What if Messenger could have seen you now? A lone figure wandering the world it once circled, leaving footprints beside its cratered tomb. You smile at the idea, knowing that even fiction can honour fact. Then softly you whisper, "Thank you for showing us the silence." The light sharpens, cutting across the ground like a blade, and for a heartbeat you see Mercury as messenger saw it, every ridge etched, every crater rim blazing gold. The spacecraft's lens caught all this without ever hearing it, without air, without breath, just the unending brilliance of a world too close to the sun to hide. You turn away from the imagined wreckage and keep walking. The silence feels fuller now, almost companionable. Every step echoes with the memory of machines that came before you. Metal messengers, voices of Earth carried on solar winds. They taught us how to see this place, and you'll take care to remember it for them. You keep walking east toward the brighter half of the horizon, though on Mercury east is an approximation at best. The sun is still the boss here, defining direction not by compass, but by dominance. In your imagination you can already see what's coming next. The arrival of Bepi Colombo, humanity's next emissary to this small defiant world. You glance upward, half expecting to spot it glinting somewhere near the sun, till years away from orbital insertion, looping endlessly through the gravity's corridors. It's strange to think that while you walk through this fictional silence, real spacecraft are crossing the void on predictable, beautiful arcs of mathematics. Bepi Colombo, named after Giuseppe Bepi Colombo, the Italian mathematician who first worked out Mercury's orbital resonance, is a double mission, a duet of machines choreographed for precision. There's ESA's Mercury Planetary Orbiter, designed to map the planet's surface, mineralogy, and topography in high detail. Then there's Japan's Mercury Magnetospheric Orbiter, also called MIO, tasked with studying the magnetic field and plasma environment that swirl invisibly around the planet. Two orbiters, one story, the outside and the inside, the visible and the hidden. You imagine them travelling together, tethered for now, waiting for the moment when they'll separate and each begin its own chapter. You crouch beside a low boulder, letting its faint shadow stripe across your boots. You think about the physics behind Bepi Colombo's journey, how it's performing not one, not two, but 9 flybys, 1 at Earth, 2 at Venus, and 6 at Mercury itself, each time shedding a little velocity like a stone skipping across planetary gravity wells. It's the long way home, a 7-year dance of patience, because to reach Mercury isn't about power, it's about restraint. To fall toward the sun and stay there safely requires careful braking against the pull of light itself. The irony makes you smile. To study speed, you have to slow down. The spacecraft's twin modules are wrapped in silver-white insulation, designed to survive temperatures up to 350 degrees. They'll orbit opposite each other, one low, one high, their instruments constantly whispering data back to Earth through deep space antennas. You picture the faint radio pulse leaving Mercury at the speed of light, crossing 90 million kilometers of vacuum before washing up as a tiny ripple of signal on Earth. From that fragile hum, scientists will build images, graphs and models, turning electromagnetic static into knowledge. The thought makes you grin. We've learned to translate the universe by ear. You start moving again, boots scraping softly against the dust that never stirs. Each step feels ceremonial, as though you're walking through the preface of a story that hasn't been written yet. When Bepi Colombo finally enters orbit in late 25, it'll pick up where Messenger left off, mapping the poles in finer detail, probing the planet's interior through gravity variations, watching how the exosphere breathes under solar storms. Historians of science already speculate about what new surprises it will find, perhaps evidence of ancient tectonic motion, or variations in crust composition that reveal a layered history of volcanic eruptions. Maybe even something stranger, something no one expects. Mercury has a habit of humbling predictions. You pause at the edge of a shallow ridge and glance upward again. The sun looks unchanged, unblinking, tyrannical, but you like to imagine the spacecraft approaching from somewhere behind it, caught between fire and precision. Its path isn't random. Every maneuver is timed to the second, each gravity assist calculated decades in advance. It's both fragile and unstoppable, a small machine carrying generations of equations. There's poetry in that, a message written in algebra and delivered by photons. You remember that Giuseppe Colombo, the mission's namesake, was the one who explained why Mercury rotates 3 times for every 2 orbits around the Sun. Before his insight, that odd resonance was a cosmic riddle. He also pioneered to Pocrad the gravity assist method used by Mariner 10, Proof that even math, when handled with imagination, can move worlds. It feels right that his name now rides this metallic caravan back to the planet he helped decode. You wonder what he'd think, knowing his equations are still in motion, still guiding steel through the dark. As you walk, the ground begins to slope gently downward toward a wide plain where the light shimmers like water. The illusion almost tricks you. For a moment you think you see movement, ripples of mirage heat that mimic a slow tide. It's just the surface expanding, exhaling under the weight of sunlight. The exosphere would be active here, sodium atoms drifting upward like tiny lanterns. When Bepi Colombo arrives, its instruments will measure how these atoms vary across the day and night sides, how magnetism sculpts their flow, how solar radiation pulls them into long, invisible banners. Every detail helps decode the relationship between this planet and its overwhelming star. You imagine the data coming in, spectral maps, particle counts, magnetometer readings, each line of code revealing something delicate and ancient. Scientists will compare the results with messengers to see what's changed. If Mercury's magnetic field is shifting, if new hollows have formed, if the surface has subtly rearranged itself under relentless bombardment. Historians still argue whether Mercury's cooling and shrinking continues today, or whether it has finally gone still. Bepi Colombo may end that argument once and for all. You sit for a moment on a warm ledge, pretending to watch the spacecraft approach. The silence feels charged, as if waiting for applause. You picture the twin orbiters separating, one diving low, one circling high, like two dancers spinning apart mid-performance. The lower orbiter will skim barely 400 kilometers above the surface, close enough to trace the planet's gravity like fingers reading Braille. The other will ride through the magnetic tail, watching charged particles stream outward. Between them, they'll create a full portrait of Mercury's identity, inside, outside, visible, invisible. For a brief second, you let yourself imagine the view from the spacecraft's cameras. Mercury will fill the frame, grey and gold, flecked with shadowed craters, sunlight glancing off the edges. The sun will dominate the backdrop, its radiation a constant roar that instruments translate into numbers. You picture a small antenna turning toward Earth, sending data home. On the other end, hundreds of scientists will listen, their screens lighting up with readings, their voices buzzing softly in rooms filled with coffee and midnight hope. You smile. Exploration doesn't always roar, it often hums. The ridge behind you casts a long, knife-thin shadow across the plain. You trace it with your eyes, thinking how Bepi Colombo's own shadow will one day sweep across this very ground. Proof that light, distance, and persistence can bridge even the fiercest voids. You whisper to the invisible spacecraft, "See you soon," and your words disappear into the golden quiet. Mercury remains indifferent, but that's all right. Curiosity doesn't need permission, it only needs orbit. You keep walking, your path bending slightly toward the east as the sunlight deepens, the horizon turning molten. For a while you think you're seeing a mirage, but no, it's real. The sun itself appears to wobble, to hesitate in its slow climb. You blink, and it moves backward. Not your imagination this time. This is the great optical paradox of Mercury, the strangest day in the solar system. The sun doesn't simply rise and set here, it performs a dance, a two-step so slow you could measure it in weeks. You stand still, caught between disbelief and awe, and whisper, "You're not supposed to do that." On Mercury, days and years tangle in celestial mischief. The planet rotates 3 times on its axis for every 2 orbits around the sun. That 3-in-2 resonance creates the most peculiar rhythm in the sky, a solar day that lasts 176 Earth days, twice as long as its year. Historians of astronomy still argue whether ancient sky watchers noticed this, tracking the planet's light as it darted near dawn and dusk. But even if they didn't know the math, they must have sensed its mischief, the planet that appears, disappears, and reappears faster than any other. Mercury's orbit is a trickster's ellipse, not a perfect circle, but stretched so far that its speed changes dramatically. Faster near perihelion, slower near aphelion. This uneven race creates the optical illusion now unfolding before you. You watch as the sun creeps higher, then slows, stalls, and, impossibly, slides backward for a time before resuming its climb. It's a celestial hesitation, as though the star itself can't decide which way to turn. On some long Mercury mornings, the sun actually rises, retreats, and rises again, giving parts of the surface 2 dawns and 2 twilights in a single day. You grin, thinking how Earth's poets would lose their minds trying to describe that. First joke. Mercury's weather forecast probably says, expect sunrise delays and emotional whiplash. You crouch to steady your balance, even though nothing's moving but light. The landscape glows gold and white, shadows stretching in strange directions as the sun reverses course. The effect is eerie, dreamlike, like standing inside time's gears as they grind and slip. You imagine watching an entire Mercury day here, 2 long sunrises, a blinding noon that lasts for weeks, and then 2 sunsets drawn out across half a year. You'd have plenty of time for breakfast. And by the time lunch rolled around, entire civilizations could have risen and fallen back home. You stand again and turn slowly, watching the light ripple across the plains. Mercury's slow spin means that each point on its surface bakes under relentless heat, then freezes for months of darkness. The result is stress, fracture, and endless renewal. You remember the ridges and scarps you crossed earlier. Those wrinkles are not just cooling scars, but evidence of this slow internal stretching. The day-night extremes constantly test the crust, and yet somehow it endures. Maybe that's the real lesson of this bizarre day. Endurance through imbalance. Above you, the sky remains black even at full daylight. There's no blue here, no atmosphere to scatter sunlight. The stars remain visible, faint but unwavering, even with the sun dominating half the sky. You spot Earth, a tiny pale dot hanging above the horizon, never far from the sun's glare. You raise a gloved hand and trace a small circle around it with your finger. That's home, that's where clocks make sense and shadows obey. But here, time loops like a lazy figure 8. You start walking again, trying to understand the logic your brain insists must exist somewhere in this chaos. The 3-2 resonance, you recall, was first explained in the 1960s when radar reflections from Earth revealed Mercury's true rotation period. Before that, astronomers had assumed it always kept one face toward the sun, like the moon does to Earth. The truth turned out stranger, not tidally locked, but rhythmically chained, dancing to a beat only it could hear. The revelation changed everything about how we imagined Mercury's surface temperatures and geology. Historians still debate whether those early miscalculations delayed our exploration or made the later discoveries sweeter. You glance back. The sun has resumed its forward march now, climbing steadily, burning away the illusion. You smile wryly. Mercury's just showing off, proving it can outwit the very star it orbits. Second joke. Somewhere, the laws of physics are taking an aspirin. The heat returns, pressing down like a weight, and the landscape begins to shimmer again. The long shadows contract, folding inward as the sun climbs higher. It's the slowest noon you'll ever experience, yet somehow it feels like it's happening all at once. As you continue across the plain, you think of what this means for any future explorer stationed here. A day shift could last weeks. A sunrise could linger for 10 Earth days before the light ever changes angle. Solar panels would thrive, but patience would become a survival skill. You'd measure time not in hours, but in the subtle movements of shadow and temperature, the rhythm of a sun that refuses to stay predictable. You chuckle softly. No wonder they named this planet after a messenger god. You'd need wings on your sandals just to keep your sanity. The terrain ahead ripples with small hills, old volcanic domes perhaps, their slopes etched with fine lines of shadow. As you crest one, you pause to look back again. The sun's double dawn has already erased half the horizon's subtlety, flooding everything with a uniform glare. You blink against the brilliance, realizing that your shadow, sharp and black, points almost straight upward now, like a dark flame clinging to your boots. You sit down on a rock, trying to imagine what sunset will look like here. It won't simply fall, it will drag on for weeks, light stretching, returning. There will be a moment, somewhere near aphelion, when the sun seems to hover just above the horizon, locked in indecision. You imagine standing there, watching the sky hold its breath for days before finally exhaling into night. The thought makes you strangely calm. Mercury's time may be warped, but it's honest, there's no rush, no pretense of order. For a moment, you think about how this rhythm must affect everything else here. The chemistry, the temperature swings, even the slow creep of tectonic stress. If time itself stretches, maybe the rocks learn patience. Maybe the planet's distance isn't emptiness, but mastery of waiting. You close your eyes and let that sink in. When you open them again, the sun is exactly where it was. Motionless, eternal, a reminder that on Mercury, even stillness is movement stretched thin. You smile, stand and whisper, "All right, 2 sun day, you win." You keep walking into the glare, and the landscape around you begins to change. Subtly at first, then unmistakably. The ground darkens, the light becomes less blinding, and suddenly Mercury's reputation for monotony feels undeserved. You slow down and crouch, tracing a gloved hand over the dust. It isn't grey at all, not really. It's layered with faint hues, charcoal streaks, amber smudges, bluish patches that shimmer under the sunlight. From orbit, Messenger's colour-enhanced maps revealed that this tiny planet is a mosaic of quiet pigments, each shade a story. You're standing in a world that looks silver from afar but reveals its bruised colours up close. An introvert planet, keeping its depth for those patient enough to come closer. You run your hand across the soil again, and tiny particles stick to your glove, glinting like powdered metal. Mercury's surface minerals have been baked, bombarded, and rearranged so many times that they carry the fingerprints of light itself. The darker regions, low reflectance material, contain carbon, likely the same primordial graphite that once floated atop Mercury's first global magma ocean. Billions of years ago, as the molten crust began to cool, lighter materials like graphite rose to the surface, forming what scientists call a graphitic flotation crust. It's a quiet phrase for something so poetic. The planet's first skin, a charcoal mirror to the sun. Historians of planetary geology still argue whether that graphite layer survived intact or was reworked by impacts, buried then re-exposed through eons of cosmic trauma. You tilt your head, noticing faint colour variations the way a painter studies texture. The bluish regions, subtle and ethereal, correspond to relatively younger plains, volcanic flows that resurfaced large swathes of the planet. These areas are rich in minerals that reflect light differently from the older, darker highlands. The yellow-orange tones, meanwhile, mark weathered crust, surface that's been sunburned by solar radiation for billions of years. You grin softly. Mercury wears its history like sun-scorched makeup. First joke, technically this planet invented the smoky eye. The sunlight continues to shift across the terrain, bringing out faint contrasts invisible moments ago. You think about how Messenger's instruments saw these colours in ultraviolet, visible, and infrared wavelengths, translating them into false colour maps that make Mercury look almost painterly, a swirl of cobalts, ochres and greys. It's strange how beauty can hide in the frequencies beyond our eyes. Even stranger how something this close to the sun can still look cold. You walk a little farther and come across a small ridge rising from the plain. Its slopes shimmer slightly in the light, not from moisture but from texture. Space weathering has smoothed some areas into reflective patches, while others remain rough, scattering light like velvet. You remember that solar wind particles and micrometeoroid impacts constantly reshape Mercury's face. Each collision vaporizes surface atoms, depositing nanometer-thick coatings of metallic iron that darken the soil. Over time, these invisible veneers create a patina of cosmic soot. The irony makes you laugh under your breath. Mercury, the messenger god of brightness, wears a perpetual layer of cosmic grime. Still beneath that surface darkness lies color and complexity. You imagine what the world must have looked like in its molten youth, a glowing sphere of lava oceans, minerals separating and crystallizing in waves of red and gold. When the surface finally solidified, that color was trapped beneath the basalt and graphite layers you now see. Even today, when meteoroids strike, they dig deep enough to expose brighter subsurface materials, streaks of pale orange and creamy white that mark the wounds of impacts. You spot one such ray system stretching across the horizon, its tendrils extending for hundreds of kilometers like frost on glass. Each ray tells the story of a single instant, a meteor strike frozen forever in sunlight. You pause beside a shallow crater filled with fine dust. Its walls gleam faintly blue, while its floor glows a muted tan. This color contrast catches your eye. It's subtle, but it tells a story of composition. The floor material likely came from beneath the dark crust, younger and less weathered. Scientists use such patterns to estimate Mercury's geological layers, decoding each hue like a sentence in a long-forgotten language. Historians still debate whether these colour differences indicate distinct volcanic episodes or whether they're simply records of how space weathering affects different minerals over time. Either way, you're looking at planetary memory written in colour instead of words. You lift your gaze toward the horizon. Under the unfiltered sunlight, Mercury's albedo plays tricks. The darker patches absorb heat, radiating it back as faint infrared waves that shimmer like ghost Lowen's light. The lighter patches, by contrast, reflect so fiercely that they appear to float above the surface, a mirage of brightness. If you could see beyond the visible spectrum, the planet would glow with invisible rainbows, layers of reflected and re-emitted energy telling the story of survival through exposure. You reach into your mental archive, recalling one particular messenger discovery, the identification of hollows, those bright, irregular depressions found in crater floors. Their striking whiteness suggests freshly exposed material, possibly vaporized volatiles escaping into space. They stand out sharply against the surrounding darker terrain, glowing like scattered pearls under the sun. The process that formed them remains a mystery. Historians of planetary processes still argue whether they're remnants of sublimating minerals or evidence of some deeper, ongoing geologic reaction. Whatever the cause, they make Mercury look paradoxically youthful, a world of ancient rock decorated with fresh scars. You crouch again, running your gloved fingers through the fine dust. The colour shifts subtly as you move it, grey to bronze to near black depending on angle and light. Every grain has been cooked, frozen, blasted, and rearranged countless times. It's easy to imagine this planet as static, but each colour, each texture is proof of movement. Not movement in the human sense, no wind, no water, but the slow choreography of light and time. You think about how Mercury's colours aren't just decoration, they're diagnostics. They reveal mineralogy, density, even history. To scientists, these subtle shades are fingerprints of formation. To you, there's something more intimate, the palette of endurance. Each hue, each contrast says, I was burned and I remained. You rise, brushing off your gloves, and glance around one last time. The landscape looks the same as before, but somehow more alive, shimmering with hidden detail. You whisper to the empty air, you're not grey, you're just modest. The sun glares in reply, and the colours fade back to silver under its weight. But you know they're still there, waiting for the next shadow, the next angle, the next curious eye. You stand still and listen, not with ears, but with weight. Gravity here feels oddly confident for such a small world, like a handshake that says, I am denser than I look. Mercury's surface gravity is a shade under 40% of Earth's, yet when you bounce your heels gently, the pull has presence, a quiet insistence that gives away what lies below. This place isn't hollowed rock with a decorative sprinkle of iron. It's mostly iron wearing a thin cloak of stone. You picture the planet sliced like a cosmic truffle. A gigantic metallic centre, a slim rocky rind, a hint of seasoned volatiles for flavour. You're not hungry, but the metaphor works. The core is the meal, everything else a garnish. You kneel and press your glove into the dust as if you could feel the interior through a single grain. Numbers hum at the edge of your memory. Mercury's mean density rivals Earth's, even though it lacks Earth's high-pressure squeeze. Uncompressed, it's still astonishingly heavy for its size, which is science's polite way of saying there's a lot of metal down there. By radius, the core gobbles up roughly 4/5 of the planet. By mass, something like 2/3 to 3/4. A world this small shouldn't carry a heart this big, and yet it does. A steel drum still faintly ringing under the sun's endless drumroll. You let your mind fall inward, layer by layer. First comes the silicate shell, thinner than an Earth continental daydream, mantle and crust together only a few hundred kilometers thick in places. Beneath that, the metallic ocean, a molten outer core of iron alloy, laced with sulfur that lowers its melting point, swirling slow as honey in winter. And deeper still, perhaps, a solid inner core, an iron seed cooling from the inside out. Historians still argue whether that inner kernel is large and growing or small and stubborn, whether a strange iron sulfide blanket sits atop the core like a metallic frosting. Messenger's gravity maps and radar librations hint at layers, but the exact recipe is still a chef's secret. You take a few steps, imagining how the planet announces that structure. The clue everyone remembers, Mercury wobbles. Tiny longitudinal librations, microscopic nods in its rotation, were measured by Earth-based radar in the 2000s, showing the mantle isn't clamped to a solid centre. Something down there sloshes. A liquid outer core was the simplest explanation, and it fit beautifully with the faint magnetic field you felt earlier tugging at your thoughts. A dynamo needs motion. Motion needs melt. Even a modest swirl of molten metal, stirred by slow cooling and a nip of tidal flexing from the sun, can spin up a planetary ghost shield. Joke 1. Mercury's core, basically a slow whisk. Great for magnetic meringue, terrible for lattes. You picture convection rolls inside that iron sea, heat peeling out of the core into the mantle like luminous smoke. The energy budget is tight here. Mercury is small and small things shed warmth fast. Yet the dynamo persists. Patchy but proud, Messenger mapped it and found something wonderfully lopsided. The magnetic dipole is offset northward by roughly a fifth of the planet's radius. Imagine Earth's field shoved toward the Arctic by an impatient giant. The asymmetry scrambles charged particles into peculiar patterns, shaping the exosphere's moods and those sodium halos you imagined in that dim belt of dawn. A core this quirky doesn't just hum, it hums off-center. Mercury is the solar system's baritone with a charm in tilt. You breathe, pretend, then tip your head as if listening to a faraway subway. Gravity. 2 carries the core's signature. Messenger sailed low and slow enough to feel tiny tugs in Mercury's pull, mapping dense routes beneath ancient basins and smoother flows under volcanic plains. The planet's moment of inertia, how mass is distributed within, came out small, confirming the big core thin mantle model. If Earth is a layered symphony, Mercury is more like a minimalist track. Bass, a whisper of mids, and then the shimmering highs of a sunlit crust. It's spare, clean, and brutally effective. Standing on this metal-forward world, you think back to its birth scars, the catastrophic collision theories you walked through earlier. One story says Mercury was once bulkier, then mauled by a colossal impact that stripped off lighter rocks and left a core-forward remnant. Another suggests the young sun blasted away volatiles and silicates with intense radiation and winds, pruning the early planet like a bonsai of metal. Historians still argue whether it was one terrible day or a long, eroding season. But either way, the ending is here beneath your boots, an iron heart laid bare by circumstance still beating against the solar heat. You drift into a playful fringe thought, the sort historians of ideas would file under quirky but persistent. Alchemists once believed quicksilver was the seed of all metals, the mercurial essence that matured into gold inside Earth's womb. Not great chemistry, you admit, but tantalizing symbolism. On this Mercury, the metaphor flips. The planet itself is the metallic seed, overripe with iron, a core so dominant that rock is merely ornament. Joke 2, if planets were chocolate bars, Mercury skipped milk and went straight for 90% dark. You pace a slow circle, noticing how the ground's micro-tilts and your body's balance game each other out. Surface gravity here is roughly the same as Mars's, yet it feels different, less hollow, more there. You recall how Messenger's altimeter traced the heights of scarps and basin rims with laser-straight confidence, the beam bouncing back from rock that answers crisply because a metallic mass anchors the echo. Even the planet's global contraction, the way those lobate scarps crisscross like puckered seams, reflects the core's cooling story. As the metallic center loses heat and shrinks, the crust can't help but buckle and fold. You walked those wrinkles, you felt their logic underfoot. You find a rock, sit and stare at the blazing sun. The dynamo question lingers. Why hasn't Mercury's field died? Some models say sulfur-rich iron stays liquid longer. Others point to slow tidal kneading from the sun, maintaining just enough motion. Still others propose double diffusive convection, a layered stew where heat and composition gradients drive persistent if sluggish circulation. Historians still argue whether the dynamo is core deep or flirtatiously shallow, perhaps perched in an outer shell above a stratified layer. The data are good, the puzzle is better. Mercury smiles by not answering. A memory drifts in like cool shade. When Messenger finally dove to its end, its last low passes sharpened gravity maps over Caloris and the polar regions. Subtle anomalies suggested density contrasts below, ancient magma plumbing frozen in iron's neighbourhood. Those same passes refined the crustal thickness estimates, showing how shock and lava worked as a tag team across geologic ages. The story fits your steps like footprints. Impact, melt, shriu, cross, cool, shrink to wrinkle, repeat, under the metronome of an iron heart slowly giving up heat to the void. You touch the dust again, Envoy, thinking of that north-shifted magnetic field and the sodium tail you followed in your mind. The core doesn't just keep time, it writes Mercury's weather that isn't weather, steering charged particles, sculpting exosphere fountains, painting invisible auroral hints across the magnetotail. If Earth's field is a cathedral bell, Mercury's is a desk chime. Quieter, yes, but precise, insistent, and capable of moving the smallest things at the right moments. Joke 3, size doesn't matter, alignment does, ask any compass. Your gaze softens, sliding inward once more. Imagine the inner core if it's there, growing grain by grain as the outer liquid freezes, squeezing out lighter elements into the melt, feeding convection, one thin calorie at a time. Imagine crystalline iron forming under gravity's stern instruction, each lattice a note in the planet's long, cooling hymn. No plates crash here, no oceans surge. Mercury's drama is interior, a private theatre of metal and time. You think of the hollows again, bright pits where volatile rich rocks sublimed, and see them now as punctuation marks to the core's sentence. Even the surface can't help echoing the chemistry down below. You rise and feel that gravity handshake once more, steady and modest. It's funny, you think, how Mercury's reputation is all sun and silence, when its truest identity may be subterranean, an iron will wrapped in ash. You start walking, and your footprints press their thin testimony into the dust. A soft-skinned visitor, held gently but firmly by a planet that is mostly heart. Beneath you, far below the scarps and lava plains, the molten metal turns another patient swirl. The planet does not announce it. It doesn't have to. You're already moving to its tempo. The heat leans on you again, so heavy and constant that even imagination starts to sweat. The idea of a human body here, a real one, vulnerable and damp and full of soft organs, feels absurd. You take a few slow steps and start running the mental checklist for survival, because curiosity is one thing, but physics has rules, and Mercury enforces them without mercy. On the day side, the surface can climb past 430 degs. In shadow, it plunges below. 180 degs. The difference between stepping forward and stepping backward could be the difference between molten and frozen. You'd have to live like a migrating shade, always walking that twilight line. You smile ruefully. Mercury doesn't offer comfort, only challenge. You pause, picturing what it would take to survive even an hour of this. A habitat perched on tracks, maybe. Something that could roll gently around the planet's circumference, staying forever within the narrow band between day and night. The engineers back home already nicknamed it the Dawn Crawler in concept sketches. Its shell would be a mirror of mirrors, layered with ultra-reflective foil and ceramic armour. Inside, it would stay at a polite 20 degrees Celsius, while outside the hull glows cherry red. And when the planet turns too quickly or too slowly, you'd just nudge the machine forward, chasing perpetual twilight. First joke, Mercury's idea of mobile home is literal. You run through the rest of the gear in your head. A suit. Obvious. But not the usual kind of pressurized bubble used on Mars. Here you'd need a walking thermos, a personal fusion of refrigerator and oven. It would have dual circulation systems, liquid nitrogen veins to absorb heat and electric heaters to keep you from freezing during shadow intervals. The helmet would double as a miniature radiation bunker, with layers of bismuth glass and electrochromic filters that darken faster than a blink. Even your boots would matter. They'd have to survive contact with metal-rich dust that conducts heat like gilt. A few engineers once joked about lava crocs as a prototype nickname. You're almost certain HR intervened. You crouch beside a rock and imagine testing one of those suits here, feeling the tug of weaker gravity as you plant each step. Mercury's reduced pull might make moving easy, but inertia remains the same. Trip and you'd float in slow motion, a graceful tumble that ends with a hard, hot landing. There'd be no air resistance to slow you down, just your own flailing dignity. Second joke, zero atmosphere means zero chance of playing it off casually. Still, walking would feel light, almost buoyant, a strange contrast to the oppressive heat pressing from all directions. You rise and picture what a proper outpost might look like. The poles, maybe, that's where the ice hides after all. Permanent shadows inside deep craters would offer natural insulation, eternal cold storage. A base there could harvest water from the ancient frost, splitting it into oxygen and hydrogen for fuel. Solar panels perched on the crater rim would catch perpetual sunlight, while the settlement below stays cool. It's the only place on the planet where energy crisis and air conditioning bill might cancel each other out. Bepi Colombo's future readings will refine those polar maps, telling the next generation of explorers exactly where to dig. You start walking again, tracing the imaginary route of that future mission. Maybe humans won't come for centuries, maybe they'll send autonomous rovers first, machines built to endure the temperature mood swings. A rover would need no bedtime, no sunscreen, just good insulation and humour programmed into its code. You smile at the thought, robotic explorers trading jokes in binary about their solar tans. Third joke, Erwan Matayu 100 is too hot. But eventually, inevitably, someone will want to stand here for real, to feel the gravity shift under their boots, to look up at a sun twice as large as it is from Earth, to witness that impossible double sunrise. You imagine it, a human shadow stretching across a grey plain, the first real footprint sinking into dust that hasn't moved for eons, a momentary trespass in a place that has only ever known machines and meteorites. You pause again and think of the challenges beyond temperature. There's radiation for one, the solar wind's endless spray of charged particles. Mercury's faint magnetic field deflects some, but not nearly enough. A human habitat here would need a thick shell of regolith piled around it, or perhaps subsurface tunnels carved into ancient lava tubes. The irony isn't lost on you. To live closest to the sun, you'd have to live underground. Historians of exploration will one day laugh about that. Humans chasing sunlight only to hide from it. You sit on a rock that feels hot even in your imagination. The sunlight doesn't just burn, it blurs the air. Or what would be air if there were any? You think about energy, how abundant it is here. A single square metre of sunlight carries over 10 times the power Earth receives. For a civilization with enough discipline, Mercury could be an energy paradise, a forge world, a solar foundry where ships are built in the glare of creation. The Japanese and European engineers of Bepi Colombo joked once that the planet could power every city on Earth if we could just plug it in. The problem, of course, would be unplugging it afterward. You stand, imagining the hum of distant machinery. The first colony, perhaps, not built for comfort but for endurance. A research dome glinting in twilight. A series of mirrored habitats tracing the curve of the Terminator, each following the sunlit edge like pearls on a string. Inside, scientists would sleep in shifts, wake to sunlight that barely changes, and drink water melted from ancient ice. They'd measure magnetic tremors, watch the sodium tail shimmer, and know they were living closer to the sun than any creature before them. You let the image fade. There's no noise here, no scent, no wind, just the idea of heat brushing across your thoughts. For now, Mercury belongs to silence, but you can feel the potential. A planet poised between destruction and endurance, inviting humanity to test its cleverness against the sun's unrelenting gaze. You whisper softly, "Not yet, but soon," and the words vanish into the light. The silence remains absolute, but it feels different now, less lonely, more expectant. Mercury waits, not as a threat but as a challenge, daring the fragile species from the blue planet to prove it can build homes in the glare of a star. You keep walking until the landscape evens out again. A wide, flat stretch of rock and dust pocked by craters overlapping, like ripples frozen in time. The ground looks still, but it's an archive. Every impact a timestamp, every ridge a fossilized tremor. You crouch near a small crater rim, tracing the way its edge intrudes on another, older one beneath it. The overlap tells the story of sequence. Newer over older, strike over strike, a slow accumulation of history written not in ink but in shrapnel. Mercury's face is a diary of violence written over 4 billion years. You smile faintly because even destruction, given enough time, becomes record-keeping. Scientists once called this the Late Heavy Bombardment, a period roughly 3.8 to 4 billion years ago when debris swept through the inner solar system like a cosmic hailstorm. Earth, the Moon, Mars, all were hit, but Mercury hugging the Sun took the worst of it. Its scars tell of impacts so immense that they reset entire regions of crust. Historians of planetary formation still argue whether that bombardment was a singular event or a long, messy chapter, but the result is clear. A surface where every crater tells a layered truth, where nothing truly new happens without first erasing something old. You climb down into one of the smaller craters. The slope is shallow enough that you can walk, and the floor feels strangely smooth, as though molten rock once pooled here and cooled before the dust settled. Impact melt. You remember, the instant lava born of force. Even the tiniest crater has a history of heat. The walls rise around you like frozen waves, bright on one side and almost black on the other, depending on the sun's angle. The airless light exaggerates every texture, and you realise how much depth hides in flatness. On Mercury, shadows are topography. At the crater's centre, you kneel and sift imaginary dust through your fingers. Somewhere beneath you lies the planet's oldest crust, possibly fragments of that first graphite-rich surface. Messenger's spectrometers once detected regions older than anything on Earth, rocks untouched for over 4 billion years. You think about what that means. On Earth, plate tectonics, weather and water erase ancient landscapes. But Mercury has no such luxury. It preserves its past like an obsessive archivist, piling new scars atop old ones but never cleaning house. You start walking again, your boots stirring little clouds of dust that fall immediately, their arcs sharp and silent. From above, your path would look like a brief scratch on the surface, one more transient mark among billions. You remember that Messenger and Mariner the 10 both mapped giant basins, Caloris, Tolstoy, Beethoven, to the aftermath of an impact that shook the entire planet. The shockwaves from those events travelled through Mercury's core, fracturing the far side into jumbled terrain. Imagine an earthquake so powerful it rearranges the opposite hemisphere. That's the scale of violence this small world endured when the solar system was still a shooting gallery. You reach the crater rim again and look out across the plain. The patterns of light and shadow make the ground resemble cracked porcelain. From orbit, the scars overlap in a tapestry so dense that geologists divide the planet into crater saturation equilibrium zones. It's a polite way of saying there are so many craters that new ones simply erase the old. You can't make Mercury more damaged, you can only refresh the damage. First joke, it's less of a facelift, more of a face punch. You pause to catch your breath, not because of effort, but from the realization that you're standing on the solar system's scrapbook. Every other rocky world has changed. Venus resurfaced by volcanoes, Mars by dust storms, Earth by oceans and life. Only Mercury kept the old chapters. Its thin skin doesn't recycle, it remembers everything. You kneel and press a hand to the ground, half expecting to feel the echo of all that ancient fire. Some of these craters hold curious clues. Radar scans have revealed bright patches within certain depressions near the poles, reflective spots that hint at subsurface ice, preserved for eons in the eternal cold. You already visited one of those icy shadows earlier, but now you think about the timing. Those craters are geologically young, meaning even after billions of years of bombardment, the planet was still changing enough to trap fresh material. Mercury's past wasn't a single freeze frame, it was a long, slow film that never stopped rolling. You continue walking, tracing your shadow along a shallow ridge. The sunlight here bounces off every pebble, exaggerating contrast until the smallest features look enormous. You can almost read the terrain like Braille, each bump and groove a syllable in the planet's autobiography. Impact craters overlap, volcanic flows weave between them, and in places the scarp ridges fold across all of it like wrinkles on parchment. This isn't chaos, it's chronology carved in rock. You remember one particular feature scientists still argue about, the so-called ghost craters. These are old impact basins buried by later lava flows, their outlines barely visible beneath smoother plains. They are like forgotten fossils pressed under newer layers. Messenger's cameras caught dozens, pale rings haunting the smoother surfaces. Some geologists think they prove Mercury's volcanic phase lasted far longer than expected. Others believe they're just optical illusions created by subtle shading. Either way, they remind you that even though violence has layers, you find a larger crater, its rim eroded by time. Inside, bright streaks radiate outward like spokes on a wheel. You realize these are rays, debris, trails thrown out by a younger impact nearby. The bright lines crisscross the surface for hundreds of kilometers, visible from orbit as faint tendrils of light. On the Moon, those rays fade within millions of years, darkened by space weathering. But here, without an atmosphere or rapid erosion, they linger. You smile softly. Mercury doesn't let go easily. Historians of planetary evolution still debate whether Mercury's bombardment ended when the rest of the solar system quieted, or whether its proximity to the Sun keeps it under constant threat. Some argue that micrometeoroid flux near the Sun remains 10 times higher than around Earth. The planet, they say, still gets pelted daily, a gentle but unending rain of dust. You glance up at the black sky and imagine countless tiny grains streaking invisibly across it, minute impacts that repaint the landscape one atom at a time. You sit at the crater's edge, resting your hands on your knees. Around you, everything is scar and shadow, yet the pattern is strangely soothing. There's order here, hidden under destruction. The craters aren't chaos, they're memory, proof that Mercury has endured every test the cosmos could throw at it and still orbits unbroken. You smile faintly, realizing that the surface isn't tragic, it's triumphant. A thought drifts across your mind, gentle and true. Maybe survival doesn't mean avoiding impact. Maybe it means keeping the marks and the opportunities to shine through them anyway. You look down at the crater one last time, its rim glowing gold under the endless sun, and whisper, "You've been hit a lot, but you're still here." The silence agrees. The sun slips lower. Well, lower by Mercury's standards, which still means a sky blinding enough to turn thought into vapor. You're walking across a plain where the ground looks smoother, darker, less cluttered with craters. It takes a moment to realize why. You've entered one of Mercury's volcanic provinces, a region that once boiled with molten rock. You crouch and touch the surface, imagining the heat still radiating upward from those long-dead flows. The texture here is subtle, fine-grained, almost glassy. Billions of years ago, this would have glowed orange under a thin veil of vapor. Rivers of lava stretching for hundreds of kilometers before cooling into what you see now. Stillness. Volcanism. That word sounds like energy, but on Mercury it's mostly memory. When Messenger orbited this world, it found vast floodplains of basalt, smooth as poured concrete and sprawling across half the planet's surface. These were once molten seas filling giant impact basins, flowing into cracks and valleys. Caloris Basin, the largest of them all, is ringed by ridges and troughs that mark where magma rose, spilled and froze again. Historians of planetary geology still argue whether Mercury's volcanism ended early, frozen by loss of internal heat, or whether it sputtered on, sporadic and stubborn, well into the planet's middle age. Whatever the truth, you can almost hear echoes of that slow-burning past beneath your boots. You step carefully along a low ridge where the lava plain meets fractured highland. The boundary looks like a tide line from an ocean that boiled away. The lava here didn't erupt from tall volcanoes like Earth's. Instead, it gushed from fissures, cracks torn open by impact stress or interior contraction. Imagine the ground itself bleeding light, entire regions glowing with slow, unstoppable fire. Messenger's high-resolution cameras caught evidence of vent structures and pyroclastic deposits, signs of explosive eruptions driven by volatile gases. That surprised scientists. No one expected a planet this close to the Sun to still hold such restless chemistry. First joke, apparently Mercury never got the memo about keeping its temper in check. You pause beside a vent-like depression. It's shallow, ringed with bright material, a relic of something that once burst upward in a brief storm of dust and pyroclastic activity on Mercury. You can almost imagine the scene, gas trapped in magma, expanding so rapidly that it flung molten droplets miles into the sky. In the near vacuum, they arced gracefully and froze mid-flight before falling back as fine glass beads. Some of those deposits are still visible from orbit, glittering faintly in false-color composites. You whisper. You erupted without air to carry the sound, drama with style. The sun continues to glare across the plain, highlighting faint lines and cracks where lava cooled and contracted. You notice how the smoother regions reflect light differently, subtle variations in tone that hint at different ages of flow. Some surfaces are slightly redder, others darker. That colour difference tells scientists what kind of magma erupted there, richer or poorer in iron, sulphur, and other elements. Mercury's volcanic history is chemical poetry, sulphur-lowering melting points, sodium and potassium hinting at deep interior composition. Historians still debate how those volatiles survived formation so close to the Sun. Some say they were trapped early, others that comets delivered them later. Either way, Mercury kept its secret stash of fire. You start climbing a low escarpment that overlooks the plain. The view is breathtaking, if breath were possible. The lava fields stretch out like a dark ocean frozen mid-wave, rippling slightly where cooling caused contraction cracks. A few isolated craters interrupt the pattern, but even they are filled with younger lava, their outlines softened by time. The Calaure's interior, far to the north, would look much the same, smooth and dark, surrounded by cliffs that rise like petrified surf. You remember reading that those cliffs, or wrinkle ridges, formed as the lava cooled and shrank, folding the surface like fabric. You grin softly, Mercury's face literally wrinkled with age. Second joke, the planet skipped moisturizers but nailed longevity. You sit for a moment, imagining what it would have been like to witness that first eruption. The sun looming huge in the sky, the airless silence broken only by light itself, lava fountains sparkling, their glow refracted through the sodium haze of a newborn exosphere. Without air, there'd be no roar, no smoke, just a ballet of incandescent streams painting the horizon. It must have been both terrifying and beautiful, a planet remaking itself one molten heartbeat at a time. Messenger found something else remarkable. The sheer volume of volcanic plains suggests a prolonged and widespread era of activity. Some flows are so thick that they filled basins to depths of several kilometers. These weren't one-time accidents. They were planetary-scale outpourings, evidence that Mercury's interior remained hot and dynamic long after formation. The irony is delicious. The smallest planet closest to the Sun had a bigger volcanic ego than Mars. Historians of comparative planetology still argue whether that's due to Mercury's oversized iron core storing heat longer, or to a thin crust that fractured easily. Either way, the result is the surface you see now, a patchwork quilt of cooled flame. You walk down into a shallow depression, maybe an old vent, maybe a simple crater. The ground feels smoother here, like glass sanded by eons of micrometeoroid strikes. You kneel and run your glove through it. The dust sparkles faintly under the light, metallic glints catching and vanishing. Those tiny flakes are melted rock, once part of lava flows that hardened and shattered under relentless temperature swings. Each grain holds both fire and frost, proof that Mercury's volcanism, though long gone, still whispers in texture and colour. You stand and look toward the far horizon, where the land ripples faintly upward. Beyond that rise lies more fractured terrain, a labyrinth of ridges and troughs that hint at both contraction and eruption, a tug-of-war between shrinking crust and pressurized melt. It's strange how destruction and creation intertwine here. Every fracture is a scar, but also an opening for rebirth. You think of volcanoes not as rage, but as release, the planet's way of yuweiing after too long a silence. For a moment, the stillness deepens. You imagine Mercury's core humming below, heat fading but not gone, the faintest spark of energy lingering in the deep. Maybe it still shifts now and then, minor quakes, subtle rumblings no one has ever felt. Messenger hinted that Mercury might still be contracting by millimeters each century. If so, perhaps the planet isn't done moving. Perhaps beneath all this quiet stone there's still a heart that remembers fire. You smile, letting the sunlight glaze your visor. You burned yourself out beautifully, you whisper, but I think there's a little ember left. And the landscape, pale and still, seems to glow a little brighter at the thought. You walk until the horizon begins to dip again, the ground curving gently towards the sun. It feels like the planet itself is bowing, a slow, permanent genuflection toward its blazing parent. The light here grows sharp, cutting through the thin edge of shadow like a blade. You can sense the orbit beneath your feet, the endless momentum carrying this small, scarred world around the sun every 88 Earth days. The speed is almost absurd. 48 kilometers per second, fast enough to cross the width of the continental United States in under a minute. Yet from where you stand, everything, well, feels still. You smile softly. Mercury, the fastest world, is also the quietest. You take a deep breath of the imaginary air and look back over your shoulder. The sunlight behind you stretches your shadow so far it seems to vanish into the horizon, a perfect metaphor for the orbit you're about to follow. You imagine lifting away from the surface, rising through the heat, watching the rocks shrink until they blur into texture, until Mercury becomes what it's always been from Earth, a glittering speck dancing too close to the sun to hold your gaze. Messenger once captured that same view, Mercury receding under its camera as it prepared for descent. The planet looks serene from that height, a silver marble streaked with pale veins of craters and plains. But you know the truth now. Every pixel in those images hides stories of impacts, volcanism, ice, and contraction. Historians of exploration still debate which moment mattered most, the first flyby that revealed Mercury's face, or the final transmission that ended its voice. Maybe both. Every orbit is a loop between discovery and farewell. You keep walking, but your pace slows. The light begins to change, softening slightly as you near the terminator line once more. The temperature difference here is savage. Mere steps can separate Inferno from Freezer. You imagine trying to pilot a lander here, balancing the physics of sunlight and shadow, watching the onboard thermometer swing hundreds of degrees with a single wrong turn. Engineers planning Bepi Colombo's descent studies once joked that landing on Mercury would be like trying to park on a skillet with an ice cube for brakes. First joke: sunside valet parking not recommended. You pause at a high ridge and glance upward. The sun looks impossibly large, its disk twice as wide as seen from Earth. Its corona, normally faint and delicate, flares here with visible structure. You can almost see the magnetic loops curling and twisting above its surface, bright tongues of plasma leaping into blackness. It's overwhelming and mesmerizing, like standing at the edge of a nuclear ocean. The radiation would kill any unshielded life instantly, yet the view is worth every risk. From this vantage, Mercury's orbit feels more intimate. You're not just near the sun, you're inside its gravity well, deep within the star's dominion. You imagine looking down at your home planet from this distance. Earth is a faint turquoise point hidden near the sun's halo, wrapped in a haze of safety it takes for granted. The thought makes you grin. Earth orbits where comfort lives. Mercury orbits where truth lives, where physics strips away illusion and leaves only endurance. You begin to picture the orbital mechanics that define this world. Its elliptical path means the sun's pull varies constantly. At perihelion, Mercury rushes forward so fast that the sun's apparent position in the sky seems to stall or even reverse, as you saw earlier. Einstein himself used Mercury to test his theory of general relativity. Its orbit precesses slightly, shifting the position of its closest approach to the sun with every cycle. Historians of science still call that the most famous wobble in history. It was Mercury's subtle defiance of Newton that confirmed Einstein's new universe. You laugh softly. This little world changed the rules just by existing. You start to climb again, tracing an imaginary line toward where a spacecraft might depart. Your thoughts drift to gravity assists, the delicate choreography used by Mariner 10 Messenger and Bepi Colombo. Each mission had to shed enormous energy just to slow down enough to orbit this world. That's the paradox. Falling toward the sun is easy, stopping here is hard. Mercury is a gravitational trap disguised as proximity. To orbit it is to dance with the sun's pull while pretending not to burn. You reach the top of the ridge and stop, gazing outward. The landscape stretches away in bands of gold and black, each marking the divide between scorching day and eternal night. Beyond that darkness lies space itself, unbroken, absolute. You can almost feel the emptiness tugging at you, an invitation to rise, to leave. The idea feels gentle, not frightening. You've seen what you came to see, the ridges, the ice, the fire, the silence. The rest is orbit, the long glide home. In your imagination you begin to ascend. The ground falls away, the horizon curves sharply, and Mercury's limb glows with sunlight like a coin catching fire. You look down and see the world as a whole for the first time, a shimmering sphere half in blinding day, half in quiet night. The Terminator line glides slowly across the surface, carrying your shadow with it. You think of all the missions that trace these same contours, their orbits decaying, their cameras still warm as they slip toward oblivion. Higher still. The sun dominates everything now, swallowing half the field of view. Mercury becomes a crescent, then a bead of silver light moving faster than thought. You picture Bepi Colombo arriving, twin orbiters separating like seeds from a pod, one circling high, one diving low, each whispering data to Earth. From this altitude, even silence seems to hum. You realize you're hearing memory. The sound of machines, of mathematics, of curiosity. You glance once more at the glowing hemisphere below. Mercury's shadowed poles hide their ice, its scarred equator keeps its heat, and somewhere deep beneath it all, the molten core still turns. You think about the orbit you share, elliptical, imperfect, but still steady. You whisper, you're not a planet of death. You're proof of survival. The sun flares, light flooding everything, and for a heartbeat, Mercury vanishes, swallowed by brilliance. When the glare fades, the planet is a distant speck again, small but persistent, racing endlessly around the star that tries to consume it. You watch it shrink until it's gone, carrying silence and sunlight together. And as your own orbit pulls you outward, you realize you've been tracing Mercury's lesson all along. Stay close enough to burn, but never enough to break. The light around you softens as if some unseen filter has slipped across the sun's eye. Mercury fades below, its surface turning from silver to slate, then to a dot wrapped in brightness. You hover there, weightless in imagination and anchored by memory. The journey through that scorched and silent world still hums through you like heat that refuses to cool. You can feel every texture you touched, the sharp-edged scarps, the glassy plains, the powder that moved only when you commanded it. Above all, you remember the quiet, so deep it became a presence of its own, something older and truer than sound. You let yourself drift outward, retracing the orbits in your mind. There's Mariner 10's first swing by, a metal scout glimpsing half a planet through the early 70s optimism, then Messenger's long looping approach, stealing speed from Venus and Earth until Mercury's gravity finally took it in. You recall how Bepi Colombo now travels the same celestial highway, carrying not just instruments but inheritance, the promise that nothing is too close to the sun for curiosity to reach. You smile faintly. Mercury taught humanity to aim for the impossible and make it procedural. Below, the Terminator divides day from night with surgical precision. On one side, temperatures high enough to melt zinc, solar radiation tearing at rock atoms. On the other, shadow cold enough to preserve ice older than life on Earth. The boundary between the two is narrow, less than a few hundred kilometers wide, yet in that liminal space lies survival. You think about what it means to exist at the edge of extremes, where balance isn't comfort but courage. Mercury's entire being is that edge. You imagine looking down with your own instruments, measuring the sodium tail stretching millions of kilometers into space. You picture the magnetic field shimmering like an invisible aura, its northern half stronger, skewed upward, distorted but unbroken. You think of the molten core deep inside, still swirling after billions of years, a faint heartbeat under armor. The smallest planet nearest the sun, yet stubbornly alive. Historians of planetary science still debate how that dynamo persists, whether through sulfur's influence or slow tidal stirring. The debates themselves are proof of Mercury's defiance. It keeps giving us reasons to argue, to question, to look closer. You rotate slowly, letting the sun fill half the cosmos. From here, its corona spills outward like molten silk, golden filaments dancing across black space. You can see the faint ghost of the solar wind, a river of charged particles flowing past you toward the same world you just left. Somewhere in that wind, atoms from Mercury drift, sodium, calcium, potassium, each one a whisper of the surface, carried away but still part of the planet's story. You realize Mercury is constantly losing pieces of itself, yet never disappearing. It endures by giving. First joke. Diet plan. Lose 1 billion atoms a second, stay in shape for 4 billion years. You turn your gaze toward the inner solar system. Venus glows pale and shy in the distance. Earth beyond it a marble half lit by clouds. The contrast strikes you. Earth, loud with oceans and weather. Mercury indolent with scars. Yet both orbit the same sun, both born of the same disk of dust and fire. One kept its air, one lost it, one sings with storms, the other with the magnetism. It's a family of opposites, and Mercury the eldest carries the wisdom of restraint. The thought makes you chuckle softly. Mercury has been the subject of poems and equations alike. Messenger of the gods, test of relativity, alchemist's dream. Its name belongs to both myth and metal, intellect and volatility. Maybe that's fitting. The planet is all dualities, day and night, molten and frozen, silence and movement. It lives in paradox and makes peace with it. Second joke. Therapists hate this one trick. Accept all your contradictions and call it equilibrium. You glance down again, watching the line of twilight slide slowly across the surface. The Caloris Basin glints faintly before fading into darkness. You think about the impacts that carved it, the eruptions that smoothed it, the long cooling that wrinkled it. Mercury's entire biography can be summarized in one verb: to endure. It has endured heat, cold, collision, and loneliness. And somehow, in that endurance, it has taught you something subtle, that stillness can be a form of strength. For a long moment, you say nothing. The sun's light fills your visor, bright enough to erase stars, bright enough to feel alive. You realize this is the quiet finale every explorer dreams of. Not applause, not revelation, but understanding. The smallest planet near the sun isn't a relic of failure. It's the blueprint of survival. It shows that proximity to power doesn't guarantee destruction. With the right balance of motion and distance, even a fragile world can orbit forever. You imagine returning home, carrying that lesson like a faint warmth under your ribs. People will ask what Mercury is really like, and you'll tell them it's louder than silence, brighter than reason, older than time, and smaller than pride. They'll ask if it's empty, and you'll smile. No, you'll say, it's full of patience. You turn away from the sun now, setting your course outward. The blackness around you blooms with stars again. The heat fades, the glare softens, and the hum of Mercury's orbit slips into memory. Behind you, the planet continues its endless revolution, one more whisper in the grand symphony of gravity and light. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let the rhythm of Mercury's orbit fade into your breathing. The silence you heard there is still here, tucked just beneath the noise of life. Close your eyes. The messenger has finished his route. The sun is steady. The world endures. Sleep easy. You've already touched the fire and lived to tell its story.